One day, a boy continues to find himself dying again and again. But after so many countless deaths, he's able to find himself waking up in a peculiar place. As he scans the area, he sees nothing but emptiness. He even thought that maybe he was now finally in heaven. However, as he checks a status bar, he's in deep shock as he discovers that he's reincarnated into another world. Not as a human, but a demon. Now, he had become a demon lord, tasked with defending the dungeon he was entrusted with. If the dungeon was destroyed, the demon lord would perish as well. The system worked the opposite way. To protect his life in the dungeon, he needed to improve his skills and grow stronger. From what he discovered when checking the status bar, most items and food could be bought with dungeon points. But the question remained, how to accumulate those dungeon points? It turned out he could earn points by having monsters inside the dungeon, aside from those summoned by the dungeon master. The number of points earned depends on the strength of the monster. Second, when the dungeon master kills intruders, the number of points earned also depends on the strength of the intruders. Third, when absorbing monster corpses or anything that can be considered food in the dungeon, the number of points earned will depend on those objects. Finally, the self-generation of points also depends on the size of the dungeon. But since none of this was going to happen anytime soon, he decided to go out and explore for a bit. However, Yuki's carefree exploration was suddenly interrupted when a massive, powerful dragon appeared out of nowhere. Their eyes met, and Yuki's body filled with anxiety. He tried to convince the dragon to talk peacefully, but it seemed the dragon had already made up its mind. No one could escape its wrath for trespassing on its territory. Yuki was stunned to discover the dragon could speak. He checked its status and wished it was just a low-level creature like him. However, his world shattered when he realized the dragon was actually an ancient relic, a supreme being at level 987, while he was merely at level 1. Yuki began to panic as the dragon prepared to attack, but then he caught a scent that might just save his life. He stopped the dragon from breathing fire and suggested they negotiate. Yuki was up front, admitting that he stood no chance of defeating the dragon with his current power, but that didn't mean he would accept his fate so easily. Instead, he decided to find another way to win the dragon over. In an unexpected move, Yuki offered the dragon some chocolate. It turned out the dragon had a serious sweet tooth, and Yuki had picked up on this after smelling honey on its breath from miles away. The dragon tried to hide its excitement, but after taking a bite, everything changed. It couldn't describe the soft, sweet taste of the chocolate, claiming it was better than honey. Seeing this, Yuki proposed a deal. If the dragon promised not to kill him and let him live peacefully in its cave, it could enjoy chocolate whenever it wanted. However, Yuki made it clear he couldn't produce enough to satisfy the dragon's enormous body. As a result, the dragon transformed into a human form. Yuki was stunned to see a cute girl standing in front of him, completely unclothed. The dragon then explained that in her human form, Yuki would be able to produce enough chocolate to satisfy her. He brought her back to the dungeon, where they could discuss the details of their agreement. There, they formally introduced themselves. The dragon's name was Luficios, or Luffy for short. Unexpectedly, Luffy mentioned that compared to other dungeons she had stayed in, Yuki's dungeon was the most comfortable. Moreover, it was the perfect place for her, as she had decided to leave her current residence, which was quite inconvenient. This meant she had decided to stay in Yuki's dungeon permanently. Yuki tried to tell Luffy that she shouldn't rush her decision and should think it over. However, it seemed she was determined to stay, no matter what. As a result, Yuki had no choice but to agree to her request. The next morning, while Luffy was sound asleep, Yuki decided to improve his dungeon for the first time. He began by dividing the areas inside the dungeon, making the cave section the main area. Yuki could feel the atmosphere in the place had changed. Now, he planned to expand the dungeon further, but quickly realized he didn't have enough TP points to do so. However, thanks to Luffy, whom the dungeon still considered an intruder, Yuki was able to continuously increase his DP income. This meant that to expand the dungeon, all he had to do was patiently wait for his DP to accumulate. In the meantime, he decided to try summoning monsters, starting with the cheapest ones. Yuki pressed the button, and instantly a slime appeared before him. Not just any slime, but an incredibly cute one. Yuki found the monster surprisingly cute and even named it She. However, when he checked the monster's stat sheet, his self-esteem crumbled completely upon discovering that the little slime had a higher appearance stat than him. While he was in the midst of an emotional crisis, a roar echoed, forcing him to turn around. Yuki spotted a three-headed creature named Cerberus, level 32. As Yuki locked eyes with this intruder, Slime She blocked him from getting any closer to the monster. She immediately charged at the three-headed beast, hoping to defeat it once and for all. Yuki cheered for his Pokemon ally, shouting that it didn't matter if the opponent had a higher level. However, his excitement quickly vanished when she was defeated in just one blow. Yuki immediately rushed toward his precious slime and delivered a powerful kick to Cerberus. A splash of blood sprayed everywhere. It turned out that Yuki's kick was so strong it crushed all of Cerberus's heads. Even Yuki was shocked by his own abilities. With just that kick, his skill leveled up from 1 to 12 instantly, and he unlocked a new skill: martial arts. However, his luck stat didn't increase at all. Despite having high stats, Yuki still didn't think he could compare to the powerful monster, meaning Luffy. Snapping out of his thoughts, Yuki rushed to check on Shi and found that it was completely fine, likely thanks to its healing ability. Yuki began blaming himself for letting his pet fight a monster, so from now on, he decided he would be the one to fight. For that reason, Yuki asked Luffy to teach him some magic. He kept trying to persuade her, reasoning that since his magic stat was fairly high, he thought he could handle it. But as it turned out, it wasn't that simple. Luffy decided to accept Yuki's request, but of course she first demanded more chocolate. Yuki tried to warn her that if she kept eating so much chocolate, she'd get cavities. Luffy explained there was no way an ancient dragon like her could suffer from such a lowly affliction. Yuki was also shocked to learn that cavities were considered a negative status in this world. Instead of giving Luffy some chocolate, Yuki ended up handing her a bag of cookies. At first, Luffy hesitated to bite into what looked like dark clay, but the moment she tasted it, she immediately fell in love with the sweet, crunchy cookie. Overcome with excitement and joy, Luffy couldn't hide her happiness as she realized she had moved into Yuki's dungeon. Now, with Luffy's belly full, the magic lesson began. She declared that she would make Yuki the strongest mage in the world. Then she asked Yuki to extend his hand to help him truly feel like a part of this world. A powerful energy coursed through Yuki's body and around him, so potent that even he could sense it was far different from the mana he had felt in the dungeon's air. Luffy's energy felt like a heavy, intense flow of mud. Luckily, Yuki's head didn't explode from the overwhelming mana. As it turned out, not all humans could withstand Luffy's powerful magic. Luffy then asked Yuki to do exactly what she had done before. Yuki focused as much as he could, locking his gaze on a single target. He followed all of Luffy's instructions. She told him to try and imagine what she was about to say in the most vivid detail, then repeat all the words she would chant. Yuki did as Luffy instructed, imagining a far-off land with a vast, open field. He pictured a single flower standing in the middle of that field. Now Luffy wanted him to imagine plucking that flower and placing it in his hand. When Yuki opened his palm and recited the spell, he was shocked to see a beautiful flower resting in his hand. However, his amazement quickly turned to disappointment as he realized he hadn't asked Luffy to teach him magic just to conjure a flower. Yuki wanted something much more powerful. That said, Luffy told him to imagine something else, this time fire. After a moment of concentration, Yuki managed to create a flame at the tip of his finger. Even Luffy was amazed by Yuki's ability, thinking that perhaps his status as a high-ranking demon played a significant role in his success. On the other hand, Yuki was thrilled with his new skills, but he quickly lost control of the situation. Fortunately, Luffy was right there. Otherwise, the whole place would have been reduced to ashes. Luffy instructed Yuki that if he wanted to stop using magic, he had to halt the flow of energy within his body. Yuki immediately reversed the flow and was able to stop the fire from spreading at once. Luffy whispered in awe at Yuki's ability, also reminding him that he needed to be careful with his power. Being skilled in magic meant using mana efficiently. With that, Luffy decided to end Yuki's first lesson on the basics. But before wrapping up, she emphasized that the most important thing was the image in his mind. Yuki became curious about whether he could create anything other than flowers and fire with his mana. Luffy responded that it all depended on Yuki's potential. Magic was generally divided into earth, fire, water, and wind, but there were also rarer types like time, light, and darkness. In Yuki's case, he clearly had an affinity for earth and fire magic, but he didn't know about the others yet. Luffy assured him that he wouldn't know until he tried, and he didn't need to worry. She would always be there to watch over him. Yuki then attempted to use his magic for everyday needs, like conjuring water for a bath and wind to dry himself. However, he still wasn't sure if he had a natural talent for the other elements. But for now, since he could control water, he decided to just enjoy his bath. Seeing Yuki take a bath made Luffy curious, so she decided to join him. Meanwhile, outside the dungeon, a group of men were chasing a small girl into the cursed forest. However, they seemed so terrified of Luffy that they let the girl escape. It was only a matter of time before we'd find out where the girl went. Back at the dungeon after the bath, Yuki left the house to Luffy while he wandered around the forest. As he stepped outside, Yuki began putting his plan to gather dungeon points, DP, into action. Since no one had visited the dungeon lately, and the area around it belonged to Luffy, Yuki hadn't seen much wildlife or monsters. This could become a serious problem if he didn't find a new way to collect DP. Yuki planned to expand both his map and his dungeon to overcome this challenge. While working, Yuki began noticing powerful monsters appearing all around him. Once the dungeon expansion was a success, Yuki decided to head home and cook. However, when he got back and opened the freezer, he was shocked to find that a week's worth of meat had completely disappeared, and no one else but Luffy could have eaten it all. Luffy tried to justify herself, but Yuki wasn't pleased with her excuses. They had a heated argument. But in the end, when Yuki threatened not to make any more snacks for her, Luffy quickly bowed her head, apologizing and promising never to do anything so foolish again, especially since they really had no food left. Frustrated, Yuki decided they should go without food for the day. To make up for it, Luffy rushed outside, telling Yuki that she would take care of the problem. After 30 minutes, Yuki was stunned to see a massive pile of monster corpses in front of him, with blood pooling everywhere. Instead of feeling grateful or happy, Yuki became even more stressed. But then, he remembered that the corpses could be converted into dungeon points, DP, which would be incredibly useful for expanding his dungeon. The next day, Yuki began another day of work, determined to kill as many monsters as possible. Since he hadn't been able to use fire magic since his first day of training, Yuki decided to focus on honing his water and earth magic for the time being. Now that he had finished mapping out every corner of the area, the DP revenue had tripled compared to when only Luffy was present. Yuki thought everything was going smoothly, but suddenly he noticed something in the corner. At first, he assumed it was just a monster corpse, but upon closer inspection, it was the body of the little girl. Yuki rushed over and immediately provided first aid by applying a high-grade potion to her wounds. Seeing that the girl was now stable, Yuki realized he couldn't leave her alone in the wilderness, so Yuki decided to bring her back home. Based on observations from both Luffy and Yuki, it seemed that the girl was a vampire, not the common kind, but a rare type. In recent years, beautiful species like vampires and succubi had been on the brink of extinction due to humans hunting them excessively and turning them into slaves. Beyond vampires, there were also beings like the children of the forest, who were supposed to be in a non-conflict alliance with humans, but they too had been brutally attacked as humans grew hostile toward demon races. While they were talking, the little girl suddenly woke up, finding herself in a completely unfamiliar place. Yuki tried to calm her, assuring her she had nothing to fear, that he wouldn't hurt her. She seemed reluctant to trust him, but after she appeared and started playing with Yuki, she slowly lowered her guard. Taking the chance, Yuki introduced himself and Luffy. The little girl, named Iduna, smiled as she introduced herself. Yuki then asked what she was doing deep in the forest. Iduna explained that she was being hunted by humans. Hearing this, Yuki felt a deep sadness for her. He asked if she knew where her home was. At the mention of home, Iduna suddenly burst into tears. She said her home was gone, her entire family was dead, and she had no place left to call home. Yuki tried to comfort her, but it was clear she had been through too much pain. The place they were in was far from any human village, especially for a child's small feet. This meant Iduna must have endured a harsh journey to escape. Yuki reassured her that there were no terrifying humans nearby, and that she could stay as long as she wanted. Iduna whispered that she should have died with her parents, that the humans had told her she didn't deserve to live. Hearing this made Yuki furious. He tried to tell her that no matter what others said, she deserved to live a good and free life. In the middle of their conversation, Iduna's stomach growled with hunger, and Yuki offered to make her some food. However, it seemed what she really craved was Yuki's blood. Without hesitation, Yuki said she could drink as much as she wanted. On the other hand, Luffy asked if Yuki was sure about this. Yuki thought it over, but didn't see any harm in letting Iduna drink his blood. It wasn't like he was going to turn into a vampire or anything. Luffy was worried, though, about the discomfort of having a girl like Iduna bite his neck. And as it turned out, she was right. After the drink, Yuki felt incredibly weak. He then asked Luffy to take Iduna for a bath, promising him 2 bags of cookies in return. Thus, a new resident had arrived at Yuki's humble dungeon. From now on, life would be livelier with Iduna around. In fact, Yuki's dungeon life had already gotten easier, possibly due to Iduna's charm. While Yuki was busy with his luck-based game, selecting items from the menu, he kept getting worthless ones. Meanwhile, Iduna grew curious about what Yuki was doing. It seemed she could see the menu in front of Yuki, something Luffy couldn't. When Yuki pressed one of the buttons, a creature resembling a white wolf was summoned. Luffy noted that this high-level creature was only a child, but in days or years to come, it would grow much stronger. Yuki became curious why Luffy couldn't see his status or menu, while Iduna could. Luffy explained that it was due to something called a marriage ritual. Yuki saw Iduna as family, while Luffy was viewed as an intruder, thus giving Iduna more access to Yuki's abilities. It turned out blood was one of the most important elements that kept the body functioning. For a vampire, allowing someone else's blood to flow into their body was more like an intimate act than just a meal. This revelation shocked Yuki, realizing that Iduna was now considered part of his family. After the blood feast, the act of blood sharing between vampires was seen as a marriage ritual. This left Yuki stunned, and his face clearly showed it. Yuki ran out of the house, declaring to Luffy that she wouldn't get any snacks for 3 days for not informing him earlier. This upset Luffy, feeling it was unfair, but Yuki ignored her as he had bigger things to deal with. Outside, Yuki decided to pretend nothing had happened, letting it all pass like air. Instead of dwelling on it, he focused on today's highlight, the short-barreled gun he got from the last round of gacha. Boom, bang, boom, bang! The sound of gunfire echoed through the forest. It seemed the pistol made up for all the losses from his previous gacha spins. Additionally, he could store bullets with different mana levels inside, and after checking with his mana eyes, Yuki saw no signs of leakage. This meant his opponents would have a hard time detecting it, making the pistol quite handy. After a quick practice session with the new weapon, Iduna's summoned creature appeared. Yuki asked it to demonstrate some of its skills, but not just any skills. He wanted something unique. The creature, now named Rear, had several useful abilities. In the blink of an eye, Rear vanished with its godlike speed. Rear also had an endlessly transforming chain skill, allowing it to summon and manipulate chains freely. It could also shapeshift, changing its body size over time. All these unique abilities left Yuki both thrilled and amazed. As a result, they became close friends. Yuki even told Rear that if he wanted, the dungeon was now Rear's home too. Yuki wanted to test out some new skills, and this time he aimed to learn how to fly. To his surprise, he wasn't good at it at all. He felt utterly frustrated after realizing he'd spent a large sum of money on flying skills, only to fail. Determined not to let it all go to waste, Yuki decided to ask Luffy for help. At first, Luffy hesitated, but as soon as Yuki handed her a box of donuts, she immediately agreed. When they went outside, Luffy complained about the bright sunlight. Yuki explained that after staying indoors for so many days, of course the sun would feel that bright. Yuki then asked if she still had plans to defend her territory, but it seemed she didn't care anymore. When Yuki showed off his wings, Luffy's eyes lit up with amazement. She began to praise how beautiful Yuki's wings were, but when Yuki said her wings were even more beautiful, she got flustered. After some quick compliments, they switched straight to the main task. Luffy reminded Yuki to make use of his mana eyes and stay focused. Luffy then showed off her fake wings, the very thing she would use to teach Yuki a few flying tricks. Without hesitation, Luffy soared high into the sky, eager to demonstrate her skills to Yuki. She told Yuki that to fly, he had to focus on gathering all his mana into his wings. After a few seconds, Yuki was able to make his wings flap for the first time. As long as he could maintain that, he'd be able to fly with ease. When Yuki spread his wings and flapped them continuously, he finally saw the horizon from above. He was amazed by the breathtaking view of the sky and the beautiful face of Luffy. For a moment, Yuki was lost in thought but snapped back to reality when Luffy called him. The two then started flying around trying to chase each other. Meanwhile, in Alfaro, a border town, there was a guild hall located inside the guild office. A group of hunters was given an urgent task, issued directly by the guild. The guild had ranks within the organization, with Orichalcum Adamantite being the highest, followed by Mithril, Gold, Silver, Iron, and Copper. Since the Adamantite class was too busy, the guild decided to assign this task to adventurers from the Mithril class. The adventurers then held a meeting together. After hearing the urgent news, they began discussing whether or not to take the quest. They started asking each other's opinions, but in the end, they had no choice but to accept it, as everyone knew that adventurers who refused a direct quest from the guild often suffered damage to their reputation. They also began talking about rumors that encounters with a rare monster were happening more frequently. Now their task was to investigate why the monsters in the haunted forest were acting strangely. The next day, the mission began, and the adventurers constantly found themselves fleeing as monsters appeared in waves. While they were retreating, a horned tiger appeared. Horned tigers were known to only appear deep within the forest, but the fact that this monster showed up at the entrance made them question what was truly happening in the forest. However, before they could be in danger, Rear appeared and began to slay the monster. The adventurers thought Rear would attack them next, but they were shocked to see Rear simply walk away as if nothing had happened. Now that they were saved, they immediately fled, intending to leave the forest as soon as possible. While running, one of the adventurers noticed Rear wearing a collar, which meant that someone might have tamed such a disaster-level monster. The next day, Rear and Yuki were seen having fun again. Today their plan was to go hunting. They moved further out of the forest, where more monsters appeared. When they locked eyes with one of the horned tigers, Yuki and Rear quickly teamed up to take down the horned tiger. Now that Yuki had wings, hunting became easier than ever. However, Yuki also noticed that most of his weapons kept breaking, so he decided to craft a stronger weapon as soon as he returned home. But for now, he could only use a metal rod for the hunt. As they charged into battle again, Yuki suddenly panicked as a pack of monsters chased after them. Not only were there more enemies, but they were also moving incredibly fast. With no other choice, Yuki had to use his magical power to counter the monsters, but the ants started spewing acid at him. In this situation, Yuki couldn't just stand still, or his mana would deplete drastically. He needed to think of another solution as soon as possible. Then, he remembered that he had a storage box. The storage box was used to preserve items by freezing time within its space. Yuki quickly pulled out anything from inside the box and offered it to the ants. The monsters started eating the preserved meat. Yuki was tossed toward them, but since the ants were too busy, he had to come up with another plan. However, everything suddenly went quiet. Yuki wondered if they would stop coming. Had they really paused to eat? With that thought, they decided to keep moving. When they returned home, Yuki immediately checked the weapons he could purchase. Meanwhile, Iduna curiously asked if Yuki had cast any other spells. Yuki explained that he was aiming to become a creative demon lord. If there were no weapons available, he would make one himself. However, it seemed that Luffy didn't believe in Yuki's skills. Yuki quickly denied that. Speaking of weapon crafting, the key elements were materials, a rich imagination, and the magical abilities of the user. Yuki thought he possessed all of these. Now, with his skill of magical enhancement, allowing him to embed magical circuits into objects, Yuki could turn them into magical tools. Yuki was now convinced that the perfect harmony between magic and weapons was what made a true demon lord. To start, he practiced by turning a chunk of iron he bought from the catalogue into a dagger. Yuki then poured out his mana and activated his skill. Within seconds, both he and Iduna were amazed as a dagger materialized. Yuki immediately tested the sharpness of the blade, and it was truly perfect. Even Luffy was astonished by Yuki's creation, knowing that weapon crafting was typically an art mastered by blacksmiths, a skill developed by those living in the mountains. Yet the fact that Yuki could do it himself was simply unbelievable. Talking about his next weapon, Yuki decided to make the newly crafted dagger double-edged and larger. With his strong affinity for water magic, Yuki thought he should create a shape resembling a water droplet or something more streamlined. And once again, he quickly crafted another weapon, this time a cute dagger. But it seemed Yuki wasn't satisfied with that, so he decided to try crafting another weapon using the materials he had gathered during the hunt. He focused on making the blade sharp and double-edged. Meanwhile, Luffy kept bothering Yuki non-stop, which resulted in him losing focus and creating a giant flower instead of a sword. Yuki was so frustrated that he began teasing Luffy, and soon enough, the two ended up arguing again. Meanwhile, Iduna simply ignored the two and decided to go play. In the following days, Iduna was seen having meals with Yuki's blood. The blood-drinking ritual was scheduled to occur about once a week. Otherwise, she ate and drank like a normal person. On that particular day, Iduna informed Yuki that she would go play outside. Yuki agreed but reminded her to return home before dark. However, on that day, Iduna never returned. What had happened to the sweet girl? After Iduna's disappearance, what would Yuki and the others do about it? With that, Ria wandered around the area searching for Iduna, but all he found was the lingering scent of humans in the forest and traces of a carriage. It seemed that if she had been kidnapped, it wasn't by random monsters but rather taken away like cargo by a slave trader. Yuki was certain this was no mistake. He then asked Luffy where the nearest human settlement to the dungeon was. Luffy replied that it was only about a 3-hour flight away. With that said, they immediately set off, with Ria leading the way. When they arrived near the village, Yuki froze in place as he saw a swarm of dragons flying in the sky. Luffy explained that they were her subordinates, She would use them to overwhelm whoever had kidnapped Iduna. They quickly pressed forward to rescue their little sister. Meanwhile, Iduna woke up and found herself in a cage. Looking around, she realized she wasn't alone. When she looked at the faces of the men, she was shocked to recognize them as the ones who had killed her parents. The men vented their anger on her, saying it had taken them a lot of effort to track her down. They also told her that soon she would wish she had died, as she would now be treated as a toy for perverted nobles with unimaginable suffering awaiting her. Iduna tried to stay calm, telling herself that everything would be okay because she had Yuki and Luffy by her side. Although she had been a bit scared of Yuki at first, she eventually realized he was a good person and started to enjoy being around him. On the other hand, Luffy might always seem lazy, but Iduna truly believed she was reliable when it mattered. She had strong faith that they would come to rescue her. Until they arrived, she would do her best to make the most of the situation. Iduna then prayed to the Earth God, asking for strength. Meanwhile, as Yuki, Luffy, and the swarm of dragons neared the human settlement, the soldiers of the nobleman began to panic. One of the soldiers woke the Lord, informing him that monsters were approaching from the skies above the haunted forest. The Lord immediately asked if they were wyverns. The soldiers replied no, saying that based on the surveillance crystals they saw a swarm of 100 dragons. This news shocked the Lord. He quickly ordered all the soldiers and adventurers in the city to be awakened, as well as notifying the citizens of the emergency and initiating an evacuation. The safety of the people was now the top priority. However, the Lord couldn't help but wonder why 100 fully grown dragons were attacking them. As the swarm of dragons reached the city, Yuki instructed Luffy to keep the dragons in line while he searched for Iduna. Yuki knew he couldn't recklessly attack the city, as that might put Iduna in danger. Thus, he and Rhea began searching for Iduna within the city. Meanwhile, inside a building, the monster slaves were also being evacuated, but instead of being handled with care, they were harassed during the process. Amidst the cries for help from the slaves, Yuki knew he had found the right room when he smashed through the wall. Everyone began to wonder what in the world was happening as Yuki stepped in. His eyes scanned the area, but Iduna was nowhere to be seen. As the soldiers began to test his patience, Yuki slowly realized that he was no longer human after being reincarnated. He didn't feel that evil people like them deserved to live. With this thought, Yuki grew angry as the villains charged forward, raising their swords. Yuki effortlessly wiped them out in the blink of an eye, leaving everyone in shock. But instead of fleeing, the remaining villains still chose to fight Yuki. In the end, they were all killed, and one of them told the others that Yuki had an acquaintance, which was why they carried some crystals to weaken Rhea. These crystals had the effect of disrupting the magical flow within monsters, slowing them down. The effect varied depending on the strength of the creature. Now, Yuki finally understood why these so-called adventurers wanted to venture deep into the forest. However, when Yuki checked their stats, it seemed almost impossible for them to defeat him, as they were all weaklings. They couldn't bear the thought of Yuki stepping on their pride, and as a result, they were all killed when Yuki used water magic to slash them down. In Yuki's mind, even mosquitoes were stronger than these guys. Afterward, Yuki asked Rhea if he could catch Iduna's scent again. But it seemed Rhea's nose wasn't working properly due to all the blood around them. Yuki thought they should question the slaves, but after some consideration, he realized it would take far too long. Instead, they would go straight to the Lord of the House for answers. And let Yuki say, the Lord wouldn't make things easy. The Lord kept begging, claiming he truly didn't know where Iduna was. He explained that the moment they realized something was wrong, she had already vanished from the cage. Even though they had locked her with high-level magical chains and placed a guard there, that guard had ended up dead. Upon hearing this, Yuki smiled in amazement, realizing that Iduna was truly a clever child. The first time he had met her was when she was being chased by these very people. A while later, a group of reinforcements arrived. The Lord of the House was overjoyed and ordered his men to kill Yuki once and for all, but in the end, they were all slain in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, Iduna was in a state of panic, desperately trying to sense the presence of her parents. Memories of the past came flooding back, causing her to cry once again. However, when she remembered what her mother had said about surviving, a glimmer of hope returned to her eyes. Back to Yuki, as he stepped out of the house, a group of men were waiting for him, grinning widely. He was astonished by the grand welcome they seemed to be offering. Iduna, hiding beside the house, hugged herself tightly in fear. All she wanted was to be held, to play with Luffy, and to have peaceful sleeps by Luffy's side. She also longed to talk to Yuki again. The only thing she wished for was to not be alone anymore. As tears started to fall and Yuki shouted in anger, Iduna knew exactly where she had to run. She rushed out from a small alley, dashing into Yuki's arms. When she finally reached him, Yuki held her tightly, assuring her that she would be safe now. But before they could celebrate, Yuki warned that the place was too dangerous and told her to leave the town with Luffy first. Iduna took the chance to tell Yuki that there were others who had been kidnapped like her, and she wanted him to save them too. With eyes full of reassurance, Yuki told Iduna to leave that to him. After saying this, Luffy dashed out of the town, while Yuki was consumed by fury. He vowed to kill every human who had harmed Iduna, no matter the cost. In the opening scene of this episode, Yuki screamed that he would kill everyone he saw wandering around. Now, with the Demon Lord burning with rage, he no longer cared and vowed to ensure that this race would face extinction. As he took a step forward, everyone around him stood in silent fear. But before he could strike anyone, Luffy appeared in the scene, reminding Yuki to stay calm because they had already completed the mission. Yuki had already avenged Iduna, so Luffy suggested they head home together, as there was nothing left for them to do in the city. Besides, Luffy was extremely hungry, so she started demanding a feast from Yuki to reward her for her efforts. After a brief moment of confusion, Yuki suddenly smiled. He promised Luffy something special when they got back. This made Luffy incredibly excited about the treat she was about to receive. Luffy warned Yuki that what he gave her better be really special, or she wouldn't forgive him. Yuki replied that once Luffy tasted the meal he would prepare, she wouldn't be satisfied with ordinary snacks for a long time. Hearing that, Luffy swallowed in anticipation, guessing that she'd have to be careful with this. Their brief conversation was interrupted when Lelolubia, the lord of the city, entered. Lelo apologized for causing trouble to Yuki and his family, and on behalf of the people he bowed his head, showing respect to the Demon King. He then invited Yuki and Luffy to his mansion to discuss a few matters, promising it wouldn't take much time. Once inside the mansion, Lelo once again apologized for what had happened that day. He vowed to improve his oversight so that such incidents wouldn't happen again. Luffy realized that Lelo might not have recognized her true identity, as she was currently in a pact with humans. Yuki suddenly understood that Lelo might have appraisal skills and could have identified Luffy as the Supreme Dragon. On the other hand, upon learning about the pact, Yuki grew curious. Luffy explained that a long time ago, during an era when everyone wanted to prove their strength, many foolish individuals came to challenge her. Such events happened daily, to the point where she once considered wiping out the entire kingdom. But then, the king came and offered a proposal of non-interference, meaning the pact was still in effect to this day. Luffy then scolded Lelo, saying that Iduna, the girl they had kidnapped, was her family. They had done the worst things to her, so they should prepare for the terrible consequences and pay for what they had done. Lelo then begged Luffy for forgiveness and declared that they were ready to uphold the pact, promising to do their best to accept all the conditions. Luffy then passed the decision to Yuki, saying he should speak for the group. Yuki declared that he didn't care what the people were doing, but if something terrible like this happened again, he wouldn't hesitate to destroy them. Lelo promised to ensure that no one would enter the haunted forest again. Additionally, Yuki demanded that Lelo bring all the slaves in the mansion to him, as he would be taking them along. As Luffy and Yuki left, Lelo sighed in relief, wishing he would never have to see those two again. However, Yuki and Luffy's request to keep people out of the haunted forest seemed difficult to fulfill, as a faction in the kingdom had recently been advocating that people should enter the forest due to its rich natural resources. The kingdom might use this event as an excuse to send the army into the forest, which worried Lelo. This is why he was determined to stop them from stirring chaos at all costs. Meanwhile, Yuki found himself in a dilemma regarding the female slaves they had rescued. When asked if they had a home to return to, most of them said they had a place to go. Luffy then instructed her dragons to take the slaves back to their homes, while those who had nowhere to go were welcome to stay with them. 2 slaves remained, Layla, who belonged to the Sheephorn race, and Lune, who was of the Warwolf race. Both of them expressed their desire to serve the Demon Lord and repay his kindness. When Lune saw Rhea, she was utterly astonished, as Rhea was like a deity to the Warwolf people. As a result, she pleaded with Yuki to let her stay, even if it meant doing simple chores. Lune wanted to serve there so she could boast about it when she returned to her village. Then, they began introducing themselves one by one as they prepared to enter. Yuki thanked Luffy for helping him throughout the rescue. Luffy shared that ever since she met Yuki, her life had become brighter, and her once monotonous days had transformed into vibrant, colourful ones. She hoped Yuki would continue to bring that brightness into her life in the future. When Iduna met the two of them, she thanked Yuki for saving her, but felt sad, noticing that Yuki now had new concubines, as she called them. This comment surprised Yuki, and he quickly realized who had told Iduna that. It was Luffy. Layla and Lune entered the room, wearing cute maid outfits. When Yuki realized that Layla descended from a demon lord lineage, he decided to ask her about the position of a demon lord from the perspective of one. Layla honestly answered that they were simply creatures adjusted by the dungeon to fit the role. For example, if a dungeon wanted a goblin to be the demon lord, that goblin would be granted enough power to no longer be considered just a regular goblin. Yuki now had new knowledge about his role in this world. While the girls were busy experimenting with new things, Yuki stepped outside to undertake another task, expanding the plains area for the dungeon. Using his demon wings, Yuki observed the area from above. As he looked around the plains, he realized the space was quite vast, spanning 1 kilometer in height and 5 kilometers in width. With this space, Yuki decided to add rivers, mountains, as well as a bridge and sakura trees. To complete the setting, he even decided to build a Japanese-style inn where he could relax all day. While enjoying a hot bath, Iduna walked into the room and asked Yuki to wash her hair for her. Yuki then told Iduna about his plan to have a picnic with everyone in the plains, but it seemed like Iduna didn't know what a picnic was. Yuki took some time to explain everything to her. A little while later, Yuki gasped in excitement as Luffy walked into the bath, completely naked. It seemed she also wanted Yuki to wash her hair, just like he had done for Iduna. During the bath, it seemed like Yuki couldn't control his breathing as Luffy's bare body pressed against him. When Luffy noticed it, she smirked and leaned in closer, teasing Yuki by pressing her back against him. Yuki quickly interrupted Luffy and tried to escape the embarrassing situation. He told Luffy that a childish body like hers didn't excite him. Iduna stepped in to stop the two from arguing, and then they all settled into the hot bath to relax. At that moment, Yuki asked Luffy if she knew the conditions for earning titles in this world. Typically, people earned titles after accomplishing something extraordinary. Additionally, one could receive a title if their thoughts or intentions went against the laws of nature. However, there were also some foolish people out there who believed that God granted them titles after carefully observing what God had done. It was then that Yuki realized there was no God in this world, but there was someone known as the Judge, a person who despised criminal acts and those who challenged the framework of the law, and this person would bring proper judgment to the guilty. When Yuki checked his status board, he noticed that he had recently received a strange title, and it seemed quite useful. This made him wonder if Luffy, the Supreme Dragon, had other titles as well. With a smug expression, Luffy said yes, but she kept them to herself because the title of Supreme Dragon was already enough. Yuki also realized that he couldn't see any of Luffy's or Iduna's skills, which meant they both had the ability to conceal their true power. During this time, Yuki realized that he was essentially immortal when Luffy told him that, as a demon king, he had a very long lifespan. Although at first, Yuki felt scared by the idea of being lonely as others passed away, but he felt relieved when Luffy mentioned that, as the Dragon King, she also had a very long lifespan. While they were immersed in conversation, Iduna slowly drifted off to sleep. Yuki tried to take care of her, and it seemed like Luffy had figured out the title Yuki had received. This really hurt her pride. Yuki had just earned the title of Supreme Dragon, which greatly upset Luffy. As night fell, Layla and Lune prepared for bed. At this moment, it was revealed that Layla actually came from a tribe dedicated to research. She didn't just intend to repay Yuki for his kindness, but also had plans to conduct some research on dungeons and demon lords. Additionally, Lune wasn't just an ordinary wolf girl. It turned out she was the daughter of the Wolf Elder. The two didn't want anyone, especially Yuki, to know their true identities. So they agreed to stay quiet and keep everything a secret. That being said, since they had a long day ahead of them, they wished each other good night. The next day, as Yuki had planned, they all went on a picnic. Although Luffy didn't want to go, she was still dragged along. Yuki told everyone they would have a great time and play all day. They were all a bit confused because there didn't seem to be anywhere in the area suitable for recreational activities. But Yuki assured them that they would definitely enjoy it because he had planned everything. For the first activity, Yuki arranged a sled ride and Iduna was the first to ride. Afterward, the maids joined in and they all had a great time. However, it seemed that Luffy had no intention of joining in the fun, so Yuki decided to drag her into it. In the end, Luffy felt dizzy as they sledded up the hill. Luffy retaliated by pulling Yuki into the sky, but it didn't seem to affect him as much as she had expected. Although Yuki did feel a bit scared, he managed to stay calm. After a long day of fun, they decided to have lunch with the bento boxes that Layla and Lune had prepared. However, Luffy wasn't satisfied with just that, so Yuki told her not to worry, because he would make sure to bring her dessert after the meal. At that moment, Lyun realized for the first time that Luffy was the supreme dragon. All this time, she had thought Luffy was just someone Yuki had rescued. While they enjoyed their day outside the forest, in the kingdom of Alicia, the king and the prince were in a heated argument. It seemed that Prince Gloria wanted revenge on Yuki and intended to attack the haunted forest. He didn't want the honor of the kingdom to be tarnished by a mere demon lord. The king tried to stop him, saying that the situation could worsen if they took such action. Despite the king's attempts to dissuade the prince, it seemed that Prince Gloria was determined to kill Yuki at any cost. As a result, the prince ordered some soldiers to attack the haunted forest. Yuki, along with Luffy, noticed the intruders approaching. When Yuki checked, he realized their equipment was only average, but they appeared to be soldiers from some kingdom, numbering around 400 to 500. Knowing this made Luffy feel irritated, as these humans hadn't learned from their past mistakes. She asked Yuki if she should wipe them out, but Yuki stopped her, saying he wanted to try something first. However, if things didn't go well, she could jump in and help him immediately. Before engaging, Yuki emphasized that he would at least try to warn them first. After saying that, Yuki headed towards the soldiers while Luffy stayed back at home, waiting for his return. When Yuki arrived, he quickly noticed that the intruders were using similar relics as before, designed to weaken monsters. However, it didn't matter because they had no effect on him. Without hesitation, Yuki stepped into one of the tents. When a soldier saw him, the man immediately froze in place. Confidently, Yuki asked if he was the leader of the group, but Yuki felt slightly embarrassed when the soldier replied that he wasn't. Regardless, Yuki told him to relay a message to their leader. Yuki reminded them that the area they were in now was his territory, and if they planned to stay, he wouldn't hesitate to destroy them. However, the soldiers seemed confused by Yuki's warning, especially since he could easily massacre them in one blow if he wanted to. Yuki explained that he simply didn't want to kill every troublemaker that came here, as it was honestly a hassle. As it turned out, Yuki's plan went fairly smoothly, as some of the intruders immediately left after receiving the message. But it seemed that others weren't so easily persuaded. Knowing this irritated Luffy, as Yuki had just calmly decided to return like that. When Luffy pouted in disappointment, Yuki apologized and said he would show her something interesting. Yuki revealed that he wanted to test the traps he had set around the dungeon on the soldiers who decided to stay. One of those traps was the Evil Eye, a dungeon-style golem monster that could transmit what it saw in video form and used dungeon mana to move. Additionally, Yuki decided to activate the Ross Gift Bomb, a famous hallucinogenic plant capable of spreading mana that induces hallucinations in nearby creatures. As a result, all the soldiers were now killing each other, seeing one another as enemies. However, Luffy thought that these traps alone might not be enough to eliminate all of them. Yuki, with his thorough preparations, assured her that he had a plan B. It seemed he had also set up other traps, such as acid pools and invisible threads spread throughout the area. After a few hours, the bloody scene finally ended, but it appeared that Luffy still wasn't fully satisfied. A few days later, the soldier Yuki had spoken with, who had retreated, reported to the capital about what had happened in the forest. However, instead of listening to him, he was dismissed from his position. He was furious that the prince could do such a thing. At a tavern, he vented his frustrations about how the prince had been blinded by his ideals and had sent troops to a place where such powerful monsters resided. Meanwhile, all of his frustrations were overheard by Lord Lalo. As a lord governing the land near the infamous haunted forest, Lalo was interested in hiring the talented warrior who had just lost his job. Lalo then asked the unfortunate soldier if he would accept his offer. And just like that, the plan to harness these emotions began. Meanwhile, Yuki and the others were enjoying a leisurely walk through the forest. It seemed that Yuki was captivated by Luffy's beauty, to the point where, when caught staring, he justified it by saying it was the only good thing about her. As they ventured deeper into the forest, they discovered a 1,000-year-old tree as well as a carnivorous plant monster. Throughout the day, they played with Rhea and relaxed by a beautiful, peaceful lake. Although Luffy was initially hesitant to play with Rhea and Iduna, she eventually decided to join in with everyone. The next day, when Iduna woke them up, it seemed that Yuki had undergone a racial evolution. This happens when someone reaches a certain level and evolves into a higher version of their race. It mainly occurs in races other than humans. Apparently, the fact that Yuki had killed many people using his traps had caused this transformation. Layla, who had been researching dungeons and demon lords, was very excited about Yuki's changes, so much so that even Yuki felt a bit uncomfortable under her intense gaze. After breakfast, Yuki realized that along with his racial evolution, the dungeon's item list had also been updated. Furthermore, Luffy noticed that the quality of Yuki's mana had changed. With that, Yuki became curious and asked if Luffy had ever undergone a racial evolution herself. Surprisingly, she said she had never experienced it, as ancient dragons were already the strongest. However, Yuki speculated that once Luffy reached level 1000, she might still undergo an evolution. Luffy also pointed out that Yuki's appearance hadn't changed at all, unlike others who typically undergo noticeable changes after a racial evolution. But when Yuki checked his wings, Luffy was fascinated by the changes in them. Luffy was eager to touch Yuki's wings, but it seemed Yuki wasn't too keen on the idea. She suggested that Yuki could touch her wings if she was allowed to touch his. After they began touching each other's wings, they quickly found themselves in an awkward situation. As a result, Yuki stepped back, fearing he might become addicted to the sensation if he continued. For now, Yuki decided to focus on checking his new updates. He had just gained a skill called base construction, which he could use to build a demon lord's castle. Upon reviewing it, he noticed the cost was quite high, but compared to buying a castle from the catalogue, it was much cheaper. The challenge lay in how much magical power and imagination it would consume. However, Yuki was confident that with practice, he would get the hang of it sooner or later. Still, it was proving to be harder than he thought. Although he made some progress, it wasn't quite enough. When Layla mentioned that he could enhance his magical power, Yuki asked Luffy for help. Luffy said she could lend Yuki her magical power if he wanted, but she also suggested another way for him to expand his strength. The method was to drain his magical power, and once it was emptied, his abilities would increase slightly as it recovered. He could do this by using water magic to train his control over magic. A few days later, after Luffy awoke from her long sleep, she was shocked to see Yuki in his new form. But fortunately, he was able to return to his original form after completing the mental image of the castle he had always dreamed of. Once Luffy had fully awakened, Yuki led her to an area with stairs to show her some miniature models he had created over the past few days. Knowing that Yuki had done this because he wanted to build his own castle, Luffy suggested that Yuki ask Layla for advice, as her knowledge of the building arts was known to be vast. Yuki mentioned that he had asked Layla, but instead of helping, she just observed his magic. However, it seemed that Yuki's skills had improved over the past few days, as Luffy noticed that his miniature models looked fantastic, just like what she had seen before. But Yuki had also created some strange models, like the Mophodia MK2, which supposedly had super transformation and reassembly capabilities. Even though it was named for its ability to transform and reassemble, the model didn't actually do anything. The way Yuki described it to Luffy irritated her, and she finally decided to blow it to pieces. Even Yuki was shocked by what Luffy had done. He was heartbroken to see his masterpiece destroyed, to the point where he began to cry in agony. Luffy comforted him, saying that he could still create something even better right away. Immediately, Yuki's eyes lit up again, claiming that he truly was the most creative demon lord. To further boost Yuki's ego, Luffy asked him to show her the design for the castle he wanted to build, as she was eager to get back to sleep. Now cheerful, Yuki confidently presented his next masterpiece, titled Super Transforming and Docking Leficious MK2. This creation was made solely to annoy Luffy. To make matters worse, Yuki added a few irritating comments, saying that if he added the teeth of Dark and Vicious, it would become the super crazy version of Leficious. In response, Luffy continued to blow up each statue Yuki made, one by one. They argued for a few minutes until they finally tired themselves out. A few days later, Yuki's preparations were complete. He led everyone to a place where he could show them his amazing masterpiece. Iduna wondered where they were going, and Yuki simply replied that they were going to witness him achieve everyone's ambitions and dreams. Yuki was confident he could do it, but this time, when he pressed the button, the magic consumption was faster than he had expected. As a result, he had to keep the image of the castle steady in his mind. Fortunately, with Luffy's help, he was able to execute it perfectly. Both Layla and Luffy were shocked and amazed by the immense magical power that Yuki and Luffy possessed. Yuki was nearly in tears as he saw his dream come to life. The castle was built far beyond his expectations. Not only was Yuki overjoyed, but everyone else was equally excited and thrilled about their new home, especially Iduna. However, due to its massive size, it seemed they wouldn't be able to live in it comfortably, as it would be difficult to move around. The hallways were incredibly long, and there were countless rooms, but the castle would still be useful for scaring off any intruders who dared to set foot in the cursed forest. While Yuki was lost in his thoughts, things suddenly became chaotic. Luffy jumped onto Yuki's lap, trying to cheer him up. It seemed Luffy wasn't used to seeing Yuki upset, so she was willing to pamper him to lift his spirits. Yuki reassured her that everything was fine, as he would always be there to laugh whenever Luffy did something silly. But despite everything, Yuki truly appreciated Luffy's effort. Meanwhile, at the castle of the Kingdom of Elysia, the prince was furious because the soldiers he had sent had failed in their mission. He began to wonder whether they needed a larger army to win. However, he also thought that if more soldiers were deployed, the king would soon realize what they were up to. The prince was quite aware of this and knew he couldn't cover for the nobles after the failure of the mission. He realized that the trust the nobles had in him had plummeted to rock bottom. As a result, the prince thought that the only way to succeed was through the help of the heroes from the church. He planned to bribe the church with a large sum of money to carry out the task. Among them, a hero named Tennell was sent into Yuki's territory. Now, it was only a matter of time before they discovered what awaited the girl in the forest filled with unease. Yuki immediately sensed the presence of Nell. He couldn't believe that heroes truly existed in worlds like this. To be cautious, he instructed everyone to go into the safe room, in case Nell turned out to be stronger than expected. However, Yuki already knew that he would win no matter what. Luffy asked if he needed her help, but Yuki quickly refused, saying that he had everything under control. As Nell approached the castle, she couldn't help but be astonished at the sight of the massive fortress for the first time. Yuki, on the other hand, was overjoyed and amused to see his castle strike fear into this so-called powerful hero. But it didn't stop there. Yuki had many surprises waiting, and he was eager to see how Nell would react to his traps. Nell stepped into the castle despite her fear. As she walked down the long hallways, she began to feel even more afraid as the empty suits of armor started to move. Although she couldn't sense any presence, she tried her best to stay calm. But as she took another step, it seemed like ghosts were following her. Suddenly, one of the traps Yuki had set activated, causing Nell to jump in fear. Yuki, meanwhile, was laughing hysterically. He then revealed that the beings behind the traps in the castle were called wraiths, a type of dungeon monster made up of 3 souls. Those 3 souls were Ro, an expert in soul magic, Rei, skilled in psychology, and lastly, Rui, a specialist in illusion magic. Yuki had made sure that Nell wouldn't be able to detect the 3 girls, meaning that the dungeon's defense system, now in Haunted Mansion mode, was a huge success. Yuki even considered adding more defensive systems like full kill mode and annihilation mode. But before he could fully indulge in his fantasies, Iduna and Luffy reminded him to stop messing with Nell, who was now crying in fear. Even though this would ruin his fun, Yuki ultimately decided to follow the girl's wishes. When he reached Nell, Yuki tried to explain that what people believed about him wasn't true, as Nell had always thought Yuki was an evil being who killed innocent people. Yuki then clarified to her that he wasn't like that, and he only killed those who intended to harm him and his family. His words shocked Nell. She asked if he would kill her as well, since she was there to harm him. Yuki reassured her that he would never kill a girl or a child like her. As Yuki was about to leave, Nell stopped him and, seemingly out of fear, asked for his help. She couldn't move her legs at all. Yuki, with a hint of amusement, invited her to take a bath at the inn. At the bath, Nell began to reflect on why she had come to the castle, unable to understand how a demon lord, feared by so many, could have such a kind heart. As she pondered, Iduna joined her in the bath for a chat. Nell became even more intrigued as she learned more about Yuki, with Iduna only having good things to say about him. However, Nell wasn't entirely sure if she should believe the rumors about Yuki being attracted to young girls like Iduna. After finishing the refreshing bath, Nell overheard a conversation between Yuki and Luffy. It seemed Luffy was quite frustrated that Yuki had added yet another girl to the number of residents in the castle. Yuki tried to explain that he had no ill intentions toward Nell. All he wanted was to help her since she had nowhere to stay and it was already dark. When Layla and Lune entered the room, they thanked Nell for taking good care of Iduna during the bath. Yuki intended to assist Nell in preparing everything she needed for the night to show his hospitality, but Luffy quickly stepped in, saying that Layla and Lune could handle it themselves. The next morning, Yuki and Nell finally had a private conversation, during which Yuki asked for insight into who had ordered her to come to the castle. Nell revealed that it was a request from the church, not the Kingdom of Elysia. This made Yuki wonder who was truly behind all these attacks. Yuki had a suspicion that the person behind these attacks might be someone linked to the kingdom and also wielding great power. But for now, Yuki wanted to gather as much information as possible from Nell. Nell, in turn, boldly asked Yuki about the rumors concerning him being adored by many young girls. Hearing this shocked Yuki immensely. Yuki then explained that he could never do such a thing, especially with someone like Iduna, whom he saw as a little sister. However, it was quite clear that he had a deeper connection with Luffy, yet this time he couldn't say much about it. With that said, their brief conversation came to an end. However, Yuki had a favor to ask of Nell. Although Nell was hesitant at first, she eventually gave in and allowed Yuki and Luffy to accompany her to the town. The moment they arrived, the joy and excitement on Yuki's face were indescribable. Fortunately, since Nell was a hero, she could enter the town without being questioned. Because of that, she was able to let Yuki and Luffy join her without drawing much attention. Once inside, Yuki was so excited that he wanted to explore every corner of the town. Soon they noticed a crowd gathering in the town square. With the lively and crowded atmosphere making it difficult to see the magic show properly, Yuki decided to let Luffy ride on his shoulders. Afterward, they started bickering once again, but this time it was more affectionate and much more awkward. Even Nell couldn't deny the fact that the two were really close. Nell then planned to take the two of them to a guild, so they'd better get their IDs quickly. Despite being a hero, she couldn't help but give a dry laugh at the sight of a demon lord and supreme dragon working together. Yuki was very eager to visit the Adventurers Guild, but it seemed he was unaware that adventurers also killed monsters from other races. Even upon learning this, Yuki still managed to smile happily. However, adventurers also worked as bodyguards or gathered rare herbs. Luffy recalled that an adventuring group had attacked her in the past, and she had planned to wipe them all out, but Nell quickly stopped her, knowing it would cause a huge scene. Eventually, they arrived at the Adventurers Guild. Nell immediately requested the receptionist to register Luffy and Yuki as adventurers. However, the receptionist couldn't believe that someone as young as Luffy intended to join the field. To avoid attracting further attention, Nell quickly assured the receptionist that she could vouch for Yuki and Luffy's identities. Only then were they given the registration forms to fill out. On the forms, they had to list their names and class, but Yuki and Luffy knew that writing their true classes would cause a huge uproar, so they decided to play dumb and ask the receptionist about the available classes. The receptionist explained that a class describes a person's role in battle, so Yuki and Luffy could freely fill in the class that they felt suited their fighting style. A person could find their class by using an analysis skill or appraisal crystal at the guild. However, non-combat classes would also appear, and they couldn't use those magical tools because it would reveal their true identities. Therefore, Yuki decided to disguise his status, just like Luffy. He asked Luffy which class she thought he fit into. Luffy whispered that Yuki looked like a porter, but Nell interrupted the conversation, pointing out that a porter was a non-combat class. Nell decided to choose the classes for both of them, Yuki as a swordsman and Luffy as a mage. When they reached the second part of the form, they needed to list the skills they were most proficient in. Nell was surprised to hear them muttering about skills that didn't quite match their chosen classes, but somehow they were still able to register, and now they could officially enter any town at any time. As a gesture of gratitude, Yuki gave Nell some monster materials that she could sell to earn money for her expenses during the short trip. Yuki was also curious about the patterns engraved on the ID cards, which Nell quickly explained. She told him that the engraved pattern was a ripple of the owner's magical energy, known as a magical imprint. Since each person has a unique pattern, it's used to verify identity. The ID cards also glow brightly, and only the rightful owner can activate this glow, so no one can impersonate another even if they possess someone else's ID. Yuki wondered what happens to those who don't have magical power, which left him puzzled, as there were no people without magic in this world. Although some might have difficulty circulating their magic, no one was completely devoid of it. Additionally, the ripple pattern also indicates which element the user is most compatible with. In this case, Luffy's element was fire. However, since fire had low versatility, Luffy had never demonstrated it in front of Yuki, only using it to burn things. Though she felt a little embarrassed about this, Yuki still thought it was wonderful, as her fire gave off a magical warmth. Yuki's compliment made Luffy feel flustered, and she even giggled while clutching his shirt. But just as they were enjoying their peaceful walk, things took a darker turn. A group of men wielding sharp objects blocked their path. They thought they were confronting weaklings, completely unaware that they were picking a fight with two of the strongest beings in the world. The situation changed when the group's leader seemed to recognize Yuki as a demon. In exchange for keeping quiet, he demanded money from Yuki and Luffy. However, Yuki wasn't about to let such a thing happen. Furious, he lunged at the thug, gripping his throat tightly and warning him that no one was allowed to speak that way about his woman. Yuki's words left Luffy so flustered that she nearly fainted. Yuki and Nell handled most of the work, easily defeating the majority of the self-proclaimed strong thugs. But, as is often the case, there was one who was more difficult to take down. One of the villains attempted to fight back against Yuki, wielding a powerful sword. Even Nell was impressed by the enemy's weapon, but it still paled in comparison to Yuki's fortress-destroying sword, a jet-black blade forged by Yuki himself. It was incredibly heavy, far too much for any normal person to lift. As Yuki swung his sword, the enemy mimicked his movements, preparing for a clash. Although the enemy was strong in many aspects, Yuki ultimately emerged victorious. The enemy couldn't believe how easily someone like Yuki had defeated him. Yuki then explained that it was simply because the man didn't run away, despite being weak. As the enemy fell to the ground, the battle finally came to an end. Yuki walked toward the enemy's sword. He told Luffy that if he ever became consumed by madness, he would want her to stop him, even if it meant cutting off his hand. Luffy immediately nodded, assuring him that she would. Nell tried to stop Yuki from touching the sword, warning him that its negative emotions could take over his body. But Yuki seemed determined, wrapping his hand around the blade and lifting it. As the negative feelings began to envelop him, Yuki fought back, declaring that from now on, they would be under his control. As the weapon began to cool down, Yuki already had many plans for it. Nell asked Yuki after that dark moment if he felt strange or different in any way. He reassured her that he was fine. Even Luffy couldn't sense any curse or similar effects on Yuki. Afterward, Luffy took the opportunity to tease Yuki about what he had said earlier, calling her his woman. Yuki apologized and tried to explain that he had only said it because he was caught up in the moment, while mumbling a bunch of excuses. Luffy moved closer to Yuki and told him there was no need to apologize. This left Yuki a bit stunned, and when he looked into Luffy's eyes, the happiness in her was undeniable. Seeing her so cheerful made Yuki so flustered that he couldn't say a word. Luckily, Nell stepped in to ease the tension. As they left the scene, Luffy was still eager to get some grilled meat skewers. However, on their way to the food stand, a group of armed men blocked their path. It seemed like another trouble was brewing. But fate had a twist. The soldier in front of them was the very man Yuki had spoken to earlier in the haunted forest. When Yuki explained his situation and planned to meet the Lord, the soldier helped him arrange a meeting with Lord Laylo. Laylo asked Yuki if he had come to the town to take revenge on the people. But Yuki immediately interrupted, saying that he wasn't there for that reason, and only wanted to know who was behind all the attacks. However, it seemed that the Lord had no intention of revealing any information to him, so Yuki simply decided to leave. Nell, who introduced herself as a hero, stayed behind with the Lord for further discussion. It seemed the Lord had some trust in Nell, so he eventually revealed that the one behind the attacks was the prince, not the king. The prince was fixated on the idea that the haunted forest would make the kingdom wealthy, even if it came at the cost of some innocent lives. Unfortunately, the Lord didn't know that Yuki had planted a device to secretly listen in on their conversation, so Yuki also learned that the prince was the real culprit. Now the issue was that Yuki couldn't simply kill the prince, as it would cause a war, and he didn't want to drag Luffy and the others into such a conflict. So instead of discussing his plan with Luffy, he decided to keep it to himself and quietly find a solution, with the goal of protecting the peaceful lives of the girls. Yuki expressed his appreciation for the inn where they were staying, as he really enjoyed the accommodations. However, Luffy felt the opposite, preferring their home over any inn. Hearing the word home from Luffy made Yuki smile. Yuki loved everything from the food to the service, but the only thing he wished for was that they didn't have to share a bed. Yuki and Luffy continued their walk through the city. After some time, they happened to pass by the Lord's mansion again. Yuki immediately greeted Nell, whom they saw walking out of the mansion with the Lord. They were surprised to see the Lord still by Nell's side. It seemed the Lord also wanted to speak with Yuki about the cursed weapon. Yuki joked that he thought the Lord was just giving them a tour. The Lord humbly declined, confirming that Yuki was right. He hoped Yuki could provide information about the owner of the cursed weapon and how he came into possession of it. Yuki immediately checked the weapon and showed it to everyone. Everyone, including the Lord and his knights, was shocked to see Yuki handling the weapon as if it were nothing. The Lord then asked if Yuki was truly all right after touching it. Yuki replied that he was completely fine because he had tamed the weapon. At first, the Lord didn't want to believe it, as no one should be able to tame a cursed weapon. As a result, he asked Yuki to keep the weapon away, as its presence was too overwhelming for everyone. Yuki looked around and noticed the knights trembling in fear. They began to wonder if the hero, Nell, was truly all right, given the difference in their stats. Meanwhile, Yuki was deep in thought, as even Luffy could handle the weapon without suffering any side effects. The previous owner seemed to have been very powerful compared to ordinary people, so the weapon may have allowed him to level up far beyond his natural capabilities. However, as Yuki considered this, it seemed that the previous owner still retained some of his power, so Yuki guessed that the weapon hadn't been used for very long. Seeing everyone's reactions, Yuki realized the weapon was far more dangerous than he initially thought. Moreover, these thoughts had troubled Yuki for a while, so he thanked the Lord for informing him early on. The Lord simply asked Yuki not to cause any trouble from now on. Yuki quickly explained that he only intended to explore the city, so the Lord didn't need to worry. Additionally, the Lord thought it would be much better if Yuki returned to the forest as soon as possible. Yuki was surprised by the Lord's bluntness toward him. Meanwhile, Luffy praised the food in the city, assuring the Lord that he didn't need to worry, as she would never allow the city to be destroyed. This comment made the Lord feel responsible for rewarding the local merchants for their efforts. As Yuki, Nell and Luffy left the mansion and strolled through the streets, Yuki asked Nell if she was truly okay being around someone who was technically her enemy. Nell replied that it was better for her to keep an eye on Yuki and the others. After all, she wasn't from the city and didn't know her way around, so she'd rather stay with Yuki than be with strangers in the city. Hearing that, Yuki felt grateful, appreciating that she had informed them as soon as possible. Yuki then mentioned that he wanted to visit a weapon shop and a bookstore, while Luffy was eager to stop by a food stall that served tasty treats or sweets. Nell quickly took note of their requests, and they set off for the nearest destination. When they entered the weapon shop, Yuki's excitement was clear on his face. Nell remarked that the shop was also used by knights, so they were sure to have high-quality equipment. Yuki began wandering around the shop, and soon a sword caught his attention. As Yuki read the details about the sword, he realized it was the sword of the ancient hero. It was said that a long time ago, an unnamed hero had raised his hand to protect others and defeated countless powerful enemies. However, this sword now only retained a fraction of its original power. Its quality was immeasurable. Seeing Yuki so excited, Luffy felt happy as well. Sensing that Yuki was becoming someone more valuable, Yuki began to think about where and when he would use the ancient sword. He wondered what the result would be if he could reforge it. Yuki thought that with the use of alchemy, as long as he could wield magic, he could combine any number of materials into one weapon. He then asked Luffy if there were any other materials he could use, even promising that if she wanted something, he would make sure to get it for her. But Luffy quickly declined, saying she didn't need any weapons and only wanted food. Feeling a bit bored watching Yuki admire his items, Luffy urged him to hurry up, reminding him that they still had many places to explore. With that, they continued to their next destination. After giving Luffy some money to satisfy her hunger, Yuki was free to stroll around and take in everything. He then entered a bookstore, breathing in the smell of paper from the books. Yuki quickly realized that books were highly valued in this world. He looked around and finally found what he had been searching for. He immediately grabbed the book from the shelf, Fundamentals of Magic. The book reminded Yuki that he couldn't always rely on magical circuits to channel his power. So, he planned to improve by enhancing his skills. With this book, Yuki believed he could create the most powerful weapon imbued with many mystical spells. By combining fire, poison, a bit of sleep magic, and freezing spells, he would achieve his goal in no time. However, when Yuki opened the book, he didn't expect to struggle with understanding the terminology. Even though I can read thanks to my skill, if I can't grasp any of the words, there's no way I can upgrade my abilities, he thought. Despite feeling a bit disheartened, Yuki didn't let these difficulties get in the way of his plans. He decided that obstacles like this wouldn't extinguish his passion. Thus, he planned to start studying as soon as he got back. Now it was time to meet up with his friends again. Checking the map to see where Luffy was, he noticed she was close by, so Yuki headed in that direction. As he entered the bustling market, he was surprised to see many men trying to flirt with the girls there. Without hesitation, Yuki jumped in to rescue them. He bluntly told the group of men that the two girls were his companions, so if they wanted to flirt, they should do it elsewhere. With his strong and assertive aura, the men immediately felt intimidated by Yuki's presence. Nell immediately thanked Yuki for what he had done. Yuki replied that she didn't need to take people like that too seriously, as they would move on eventually. Nell nodded, saying she understood that. However, she couldn't help but wonder if Yuki handled things a little too well. Yuki explained that it all came from his experiences in his previous life. He then asked Nell once again to lead them to a restaurant, as it was time to enjoy some good food. Hearing this, Nell was surprised, as it seemed like the two hadn't had enough to eat yet. Given the situation, Nell had no choice but to take both of them to a very popular restaurant in the city. She even exclaimed how amazed she was at how much they could eat. Hearing Nell's comment, Yuki finally realized that they had been feeling hungry most of the time in the town. Luffy then mentioned that the mana here was much thinner than in the haunted forest. After all, that was probably why they always wanted to eat to replenish their energy. This surprised Yuki, as the energy needed for a demon lord to maintain their body was immense. Nevertheless, Yuki happily returned to enjoying his meal. Yuki then remembered something and asked Nell a question. He wanted to know what she and the lord had discussed about weapons like the demon blade. Although a bit hesitant, Nell decided it was fine to tell him. She nodded and explained that there had indeed been similar cases in the past, where those who wielded demon swords had caused trouble. Nell continued, explaining that these swords not only had immense power, but also carried terrifying curses, causing those who wielded them to either go mad or become possessed by dark forces. Cases like these had been increasing since the beginning of the month. When the governor couldn't come up with an explanation for these events, the legend of the demon swords resurfaced. Moreover, Nell mentioned that during the interrogation of those individuals, they revealed that they had received the cursed swords from someone. Hearing all of this made Yuki realize why the city had been so chaotic lately. This meant that someone had been distributing objects like the demon sword, making people lose control and go mad. Yuki then asked if anyone was specifically targeting the city. Nell replied that she couldn't think of anyone else other than Yuki and his companions. Yuki quickly affirmed that they hadn't done anything wrong, and this was now quite clear. However, not everyone in the city thought that way. That's why if Yuki still planned to explore, he needed to be as cautious as possible. While Yuki could easily protect himself, it would be dangerous if Luffy encountered someone suspicious. During this time, Yuki decided to be more careful and think thoroughly about what was happening around him, especially to protect Luffy and those he cared about. Nell believed that the best thing Yuki could do to ensure everyone's safety was to keep them together at all times. After discussing, Nell asked if they had any plans for the evening, or if there were any other places they wanted to visit. Yuki replied that he had completed all his goals, so if there were any tourist spots they could check out, it would be great. However, not wanting to spoil the mood, he also mentioned that in a rural city like this, there weren't really any tourist attractions, as the city was always busy with adventurers day and night. To pass the time and still have some fun, Yuki, as a demon lord, thought about experimenting with taking on a quest from the guild outside the city walls. The three of them were preparing to complete a mission, but it seemed like Nell was a bit worried about Yuki's decision. Although Nell knew that Yuki was incredibly strong, the two monsters he chose were classified as disaster-level threats. With a wide grin, Yuki reassured her that everything would be fine, as the monsters in this quest were weaker than the ones in the haunted forest. He wondered if this task would be easy for Nell. She replied that if it was one-on-one, it wouldn't be too difficult, but the two monsters Yuki wanted to face usually moved in packs. So, she just wanted Yuki to stay vigilant, no matter what happened. Yuki took the opportunity to tease Nell, calling her weak. He then asked Luffy if she could show off some of her strength. However, Luffy didn't appreciate Yuki's mocking tone, and instead of cooperating, she almost punched him in response. Nevertheless, with her strength as a magic dragon, Luffy could sense multiple enemies, even from a distance. Wasting no time, Luffy began the mission by activating her power. However, before she could cast her spell, Yuki immediately stopped her, as she was about to use the same magic that had destroyed the Mufadira MK, Yuki's great robot invention. So, before the entire area was set ablaze, Yuki managed to stop her just in time. Luffy seemed to listen to Yuki's request, so she decided to use a different spell. Seeing a water orb floating in Luffy's hand, Yuki asked her what it was. When Yuki thought that a small water orb like that wouldn't cause much damage, he was shocked when Luffy released it, and it almost destroyed a small section of the forest. It seemed that this spell compressed water and created a world inside it while increasing the pressure. As a result, any external impact would cause it to explode like a bomb. Witnessing Luffy's overwhelming power left Nell speechless. In reality, Luffy could easily destroy a human city without even needing magic. This astonished Nell even more, prompting her to ask Luffy about her race. Nell was completely stunned, feeling as if her soul had left her body. When Luffy told her that she was an ancient dragon, Nell couldn't believe it, as this race was known for being incredibly powerful from within. Yuki then joined the conversation, saying that Luffy wasn't just any dragon, but the supreme dragon of all. Although she appeared like a child and had a personality to match, there was no reason why people shouldn't recognize her true identity. Hearing that Luffy was the supreme dragon that everyone feared, Nell couldn't understand why she listened to Yuki and followed him around. Before Yuki could answer Nell's question, Luffy immediately stopped him, reminding him that she still needed to maintain her reputation. With that, the two began bickering again, while Nell watched them with a look of amusement and enjoyment. In the end, they failed their first extermination mission due to Luffy, as when everyone ran away, only the foolish monsters like goblins were left behind. Nevertheless, the fun between the three continued. Meanwhile, in some areas surrounding the city, a group of people in black cloaks gathered to discuss the stolen demon sword. After hearing the news, some members were skeptical from the start, wondering if the governor's authorities were behind everything. Their leader quickly confirmed that it wasn't the governor, but rather a random traveler whom their group had provoked. The members were surprised by this revelation, as they didn't expect someone wielding a demon sword to be defeated so easily. The leader went on to explain that they couldn't blame the previous owner, as not many people could retain their sanity after wielding such a cursed weapon. After all, he was just a lowly thug. Now their plan was to brainwash this traveler and reclaim the demon sword. However, from what they had heard, the thief who stole the demon sword seemed completely unaffected by it, making brainwashing him impossible. Thus, the plan changed, and there was no need for restraint anymore. It appeared that this group was brewing a dark and sinister plot. The leader then instructed the members to pile up the bodies of their neighbors and step over the corpses of their friends, casting aside their lives and even themselves, all for the benefit of their homeland. Meanwhile, Yuki and Luffy bid farewell to Nell after their small adventure didn't go as planned. As they returned to the inn, Yuki expressed his happiness that Nell had gotten used to being around them. But he regretted not being able to stay with the others back home, even thinking that it would be more fun and exciting if everyone was together. Hearing such words from Luffy was completely unexpected, leaving Yuki astonished. Everyone knew that Luffy was the type who didn't care much for others. Yet now, hearing her admit that she missed the girls back home was something Yuki could hardly believe. Luffy acknowledged that it might be true, and that one day she could feel frustrated by the absence of someone. Yuki also expressed his happiness for being able to spend time strolling with Luffy. However, the joyful atmosphere was suddenly interrupted when a woman screamed for help as she ran out of a nearby shop. A frail-looking man emerged from the shop. Yuki thought it might be a monster, so he decided to act before things got out of control. However, after attacking, it seemed the man didn't feel anything at all. Luffy quickly realized that the man was already dead, merely a corpse being controlled remotely. Yuki asked Luffy what the only way to stop this creature was. Luffy responded that the only way was to burn the corpse to ashes. But before doing that, they needed to figure out who was controlling it from behind the scenes. Luffy seemed furious at those who used corpses as weapons for battle. Determined to find the mastermind behind all of this, they decided to seek help from the city guards. As the citizens panicked, the city's emergency bells rang, heightening the chaos even further as it signaled an urgent evacuation. The last time the bells rang, a swarm of dragons had invaded the city. People rushed to the safest place they could find. Amidst the panic, Yuki told Luffy to wait while he used his stealth skill and took to the sky to observe from above. Meanwhile, Nell was battling a horde of undead rushing toward her. Using her magic, she cast a spell called Turn Undead, which sent the undead spirits back to their world. Nell found the situation strange, as events like this had never suddenly happened in the city before. She also aimed to discover who was behind all of this. On the other side, at the governor's mansion, waves of refugees poured in one after another. The governor suspected that no one else but the prince could be behind this. Determined, he knew the only thing he could do now was to wield his sword and protect his citizens. He vowed never to let the city fall into ruin again. As the entire city descended into chaos, Yuki observed the situation from above. He saw how bad things were, but it seemed that the adventurers were holding their ground. Yuki watched as the adventurers fought the undead, noticing how they severed the limbs and forced the undead to drink holy water. It turned out there was a proper way to deal with the undead, so it seemed the adventurers were handling things well. However, Yuki continued pondering who was behind this horrific situation and why they would do such a terrifying thing. Yuki didn't detect any intruders besides the undead, leading him to conclude that the mastermind wasn't aiming to seize the entire city. If not the city, then what was the true purpose? Yuki begins to wonder if the bad guys are doing this to buy time, or if they have to worry about the situation in the city. This means that if there is no one controlling them in the city, they are likely somewhere outside the city walls. When Yuki used his navigation skills, he seemed to have found them. Meanwhile, let's check on Nell again. Nell continues to fight the undead while chanting the magic to return to the dead. When Yuki approached her, he gave her a glass of water to drink. Nell was shocked to realize that Yuki had given her a high-class mana potion, which meant it was truly a luxury item. On the other hand, Yuki decided to call Luffy so she could come meet them, so he told Nell to wait a bit while they waited for Luffy to arrive. Yuki informs Nell that he has discovered a group of suspicious people lurking outside the city, who he suspects may be behind all of this. So Yuki plans to destroy all of them at once. Those who truly want to help offer to join Yuki on this mission. However, before Nell could finish speaking, Yuki immediately interrupted her, saying that she could not leave because Luffy was on his way. Having no other choice, Nell had to stay and wait for Luffy and do as Yuki said. However, as a way to show her gratitude, she tells Yuki that she will do anything for him when he returns. Yuki took the opportunity to tease her before leaving, making Nell feel shy and lonely. As Yuki heads outside the city, he encounters 5 groups of people. Seeing that there were only 5 people, less than what Yuki had imagined, he immediately took action. In just a few seconds, Yuki slashed several of them. This shocked the group's leaders, as they never thought that a demon lord would interfere with their plans. The enemy then summons armies from hell using their magical powers. A group of animal-like monsters appear, said to be much stronger than the undead they have sent into the city. That's why they were so confident that this would be the end of Yuki, the demon lord. However, instead of being worried, Yuki seemed very confident that he could defeat all of them in just one go. Yuki also calls the monsters from hell disgusting as he walks towards them. The enemy acted arrogant, thinking that Yuki had fallen into their trap. However, they did not know that Yuki had already realized the trick. As a result, Yuki uses a special magic, one that destroys other magic, allowing him to penetrate the magical configuration and destroy it. This spell requires a large amount of magical power to perform, but in the end, Yuki is able to smile triumphantly at the end of his enemy's life. 2 days after the zombie chaos, the city gradually returned to normal, but there were still many dangers. Although the building damage appeared to be minimal, most was burned by Luffy's fire magic or destroyed by her water magic. Not only that, they also quickly dispose of corpses and living corpses. On the other hand, it seems that Yuki did not kill the enemy after all, but handed him over to the governor for questioning. The governor seems quite interested in this mission, and they were lucky that the magic circle Yuki found on the way back was the one that summoned the undead. But no matter how interesting this city is, Yuki feels homesick. Luffy felt the same way. To make up for the gloomy mood, Yuki gave Luffy a gift, and when Luffy opened his palm, she was surprised to see it was a ring. Luffy didn't know what to say, as he didn't understand why Yuki gave her a ring. Yuki shyly explained that he thought it would look nice on Luffy, so he bought it. Any normal ring would break when Luffy transformed into his dragon form, so Yuki decided to give her a flexible ring that could change size according to the size of the user's finger. This makes Luffy think that Yuki might want her to wear it all the time. Yuki, now surprised, tries to explain his point of view, but surprisingly, Luffy gave the ring back to him, making Yuki shocked to see her returning it. However, things turned out differently when Luffy only asked Yuki to put the ring on her finger, because he was the one who bought it for her. When Yuki put the ring on his finger, Luffy looked happier than ever. Yuki thanked her, looking at her with graceful beauty. After many romantic moments, Yuki and Luffy decided to return home. They all looked very happy when they entered the house. Iduna ran to Yuki, whom she missed very much. While the maids and Iduna were celebrating their return, she, who seemed to have undergone racial evolution, had many physical and skill changes that no one could have imagined. Floating. She now has the ability to reflect and copy other forms, much like a shapeshifter. In addition, she also has healing magic, which is very useful in times of need. When Yuki checked her stats, he was surprised because they had increased a lot since the last time he saw them. Her magic was even higher than the average of the people in the city. Yuki remembered what Layla had said before, that monsters would have faster racial evolution than other races. Because she had the predator skill, she probably received some benefits from that as well. However, are her stats growing at too fast a rate? They tried to think about this when Luffy suddenly realized that it might be because she passed her power on to Shi. This makes sense, since Luffy's strength is denser than the others. Yuki asks her if she thinks her power is as strong as a precious candy. However, Luffy is completely unaware of this. Upon hearing Yuki say that, Luffy realized that Yuki sometimes says strange things. She is happy to know that she has evolved. As for Yuki, he smiled confidently, because the change after just a few days was amazing. He was also surprised to see monsters in the flat area, and was even more surprised when they were Rhea's minions. This is not surprising since Fenrir is a legendary class monster with a number of minions up to 100 or 200. Yuki thinks about taking Fenrir hunting in the near future, but for now he just wants to relax. Relax in your cozy home. After a good night's sleep the next day, Yuki immediately started her work. Today, he will create a new weapon. The finished product will be called Zion, a rainbow-colored sword in the shape of a katana created by the demon lord Yuki. It hates crime and will not forgive the guilty carrying out their punishment. Seeing the weapon he always wished for come true made Yuki extremely happy. He felt delighted with the sword's beautiful appearance. Furthermore, this was a weapon that could evolve, ideal for a weapon. Meanwhile, Yuki's two servants were also surprised by the beauty and unbelievable size of the sword. Layla, with her knowledge of katanas, explains that katanas are a type of weapon originating from an eastern country, and Lyun from the wolf tribe confidently tried lifting the big sword with all the confidence that she could do it easily. However, as soon as Yuki let go of the sword, it seemed to weigh 1,000,000 pounds. Seeing Lyun struggle just to move it a little, Yuki decided to play with her new toy. He went out hunting with Rhea for testing. He promised the girls he would be home before dinner. When encountering monsters, Yuki immediately slashes them like it was nothing. The blade was sharp beyond expectations, and thanks to the increased strength, Yuki's body felt light. Moreover, it is also very beautiful. Whoever owns this sword in the future will certainly be amazed. After intense training, Yuki goes home to relax again. While reading a book, Layla asked him why he was reading in a strange position. Yuki replies that he wants to carve magic circuits into Zion, but doesn't understand anything about it. Unexpectedly, Layla offered to teach him if he wanted. She begins to explain that to use magic, one usually recites an incantation to frame the magic and then pours in magical power to activate it. In contrast, magic circuits use engraved words and symbols as frames. By doing so, one does not need to recite the incantation, simply pouring magical power into the magic circuit. She simply asked Yuki to imagine putting all the images needed to cast magic into a drawing, as this was the easiest to understand. Listening to Layla's explanation, Yuki felt amazed and happy at the same time, because he was now gradually understanding the whole concept of magic circuits. Layla, not finished with the lecture, said that to start, they would use the fireball as an example. It will be divided into 3 circuits: fireball generation, fireball maintenance, and fireball shooting. One can also add options such as controlling the fireball being fired or changing the shape of the fireball if desired, so that the spell is activated properly. If the magic circuit is not fully connected, but if it is too large, the magic circulation will slow down. This means that the magic circuit is like drawing without lifting the pen. As long as it is connected, the 3-way circuit will also work. After a long conversation, Layla said she would go now because she had something urgent to do. Meanwhile, Yuki decides to relax a bit with Iduna and Shi. The next day, Yuki is having a great time with Luffy while going fishing. The group once again had an enjoyable picnic. Even though the trip was wonderful, it seemed like the bickering between Yuki and Luffy never ended. Iduna tried to stop them, but failed. The whole family is having the best moments of their lives, just eating and enjoying life. In the end, Yuki and Luffy seem to have feelings for each other. After the trip, Nell meets Yuki to announce something important. It seems that the prince has been quietly inciting a coup. Currently, the whereabouts of the king and princess are still unknown. It seemed like the demon lord had let down his guard to the point of becoming comfortable and forgetting about his enemy and the ongoing problem with the prince. The demon sword incident and the undead uprising were just distractions to buy time. The real purpose is to kill the leader of the government in chaos. Even though everything ended not long after, Yuki handled everything quickly. Although they succeeded in scaring everyone, soldiers remained in the city, all those who opposed the expedition plan. Alfredo still has the strongest military power. Yuki asks if the people in black leaked that information, but according to Nell, it seems like the authorities used some drugs and brainwashing magic to make the enemy talk. However, despite that, they could not get any information in their heads because there was magic that prevented them from talking about it. To make things worse, now the king and princess have disappeared. The princess's faction is currently in control of the capital, while politics is completely in their hands, and they can do nothing about it. If they only knew that the king and princess were still alive, they could storm the capital under the pretext of saving them. And if they knew that 2 people were dead, they could still attack as punishment. However, there is currently no information to cause the anti-prince faction to act. The only thing they can do now is wait for some miracle, even if only to buy more time. Indeed, this is very annoying. If that damn prince keeps sitting on the throne and controlling the army, there is a high probability that he will invade the entire region. Yuki then asks Nell about the church's plans regarding this. Nell replied that if the stubborn prince had political power, he would definitely put heavy pressure on the church, or at least that was Nell's guess based on the prince's past actions. The church is planning to save the king in the near future, but there isn't much they can do at the moment. Yuki then says that he guesses this is a normal conclusion, even if they don't know if the king is alive or not. Yuki is asked to help in the above rescue plan. Hearing this surprised Nell. Although it sounded believable, it seemed like a big deal for a demon like Yuki. Yuki explains that since the current king opposes the invasion of the ghost forest, it is better to have him around instead of the prince. Everything would end quicker if we just assassinated the prince. However, there may be problems arising from finding the person behind the assassination, and there is a risk that he may be discovered. Therefore, it is better to temporarily act in the dark. That's why Yuki plans to ensure that the anti-prince faction will make every effort to defeat the prince. But he didn't think they would easily trust and accept his help right now. He said that it's not like they would say it that clearly, knowing that being a devil would make people feel scared. Yuki decides to wear a mask or disguise. However, Nell thought that his disguise would be discovered immediately, especially knowing that Yuki was clumsy and inattentive. But with confidence on his face, Yuki told Nell to leave everything to him because he had a plan in mind. The meeting ended, and Nell now left the forest, but this time not alone, but with Yuki by her side. Yuki says goodbye to the girls, who wish him a safe trip. Even Luffy, who is known for his cold heart, approached Yuki, grabbed his face and said that just because she wasn't around didn't mean he could go flirting with other girls and come home late. Shocked by what Luffy said, Yuki could only nod. Luffy says that everything is fine as long as he understands that. She also assured Yuki that everything would be under control. She would make sure the girls were safe. Having said that, Yuki and Nell boarded rear and headed to the capital. That night, the girls had a talk about how comfortable they felt being with Yuki. Luffy explains that that feeling of comfort comes from Yuki's magical power. She agrees that Yuki's magical powers are of a different nature depending on the person. Although Luffy had difficulty explaining, she didn't really understand, but one thing was certain. Yuki's magical power had the ability to attract others, not only Iduna, but also heroines like Nell. She even called it the talent of a flower girl. On the other hand, it seemed like Layla had something she wanted to ask Luffy for a while now. She realized that the ring was given to Luffy by Yuki, so she was very curious. Luffy confusedly recounted what Yuki had given her during their short trip to town. Hearing this made the girls very excited. They thought that Yuki had proposed to Luffy. Luffy stammered to explain that there was no such thing. The girls were curious about Luffy's feelings towards Yuki because they seemed to get along very well. Sometimes they are even seen being intimate with each other. But Luffy didn't know what this feeling was right now. This was the first time in her life she experienced it. This was the first time someone faced her without fear, and it was also the first time she spent a lot of time with others. Every day is fun, but she has never experienced it before, so she can't compare whether this is love or not. She wondered if she was feeling something special for Yuki, but couldn't find the answer for herself yet. With that, the girls' conversation lasted all night. Meanwhile, Yuki and Nell finally reached the capital. However, it seems like the entire capital is on high alert. People were moving around quickly, their eyes were full of worry, and whispers were heard everywhere. Yuki wondered what had happened to make everyone panic like that. Because the guards stood guard very strictly, Yuki decided to use her stealth skills to not attract attention. The 2 people marked the appearance of the evil and hero couple. Once inside the castle wall, Nell began to grumble at Yuki for treating her a bit roughly during her unexpected flight. Yuki, also feeling guilty, immediately apologized, but he also emphasized that he had warned her before lifting her up. Yuki didn't realize how loudly he spoke, almost attracting the attention of the guards. Nell immediately stops him, saying that she will immediately be suspected if anyone sees them together. As the group of soldiers approached, Nell decided to stay silent and let their argument continue later. As the guards running towards them landed, Yuki and Nell stealthily left the spot, beginning to walk lightly through the alleys of the city. Yuki found the place unusually quiet. Nell looked disappointed, knowing that the city was usually very bustling, not so gloomy. It seems the current problems have residents in the city fearing for their lives. Meanwhile, Nell becomes increasingly gloomy and sad. Yuki is seen wearing an embarrassed mask, which he decides to do just as a precaution, since he is after all the demon that everyone fears. I don't want a bunch of milk-faced churchgoers to remember my face. However, despite his efforts, Nell warns him not to think that hiding his face is helpful, but also not to complain if they say they won't let him into the church's refuge. Yuki replied that at that time he would act on his own as he saw fit. He also thought it would be good if they could turn the story into the church people overthrowing the prince. If you could gather more information, I would be very grateful. In the middle of the conversation, Nell suddenly noticed something they didn't expect. A herd of zombies is approaching them. Yuki says he knew something was wrong as soon as they arrived in the city. Because there were too many zombies, they decided to take a detour. However, Yuki knew that they couldn't do that either. And it seems Yuki was right. Thanks to his sense of direction, he mostly knows or has an idea of where the zombies are. What confused Yuki was that the guards seemed to just let these zombies roam freely without any intention of destroying them. This led them to the conclusion that the guards might be doing this on purpose. As a result, they decide to take on some of the zombies themselves. Nell still uses magic on the corpse, which makes Yuki very curious. After asking about that holy magic, Nell said that the church taught her about it, and joked that she was sure it would work on demons like Yuki. As Yuki fights the zombies together, Nell easily recites her spell and voila, everything is resolved. Yuki slowly observed how Nell chanted the spell. Yuki realizes that using the spell can affect the magic's power. Furthermore, he also noticed that although Nell didn't seem like it, she was actually quite scared of the undead. Nell reasoned that it was scary not being able to harm an enemy, so she guessed that purification magic might work. But isn't that the duty of priests? Ultimately, Nell's job description is only to maintain law and public order, and it is not her duty to exterminate demons. As a result, during the battle, she felt very scared. After a long journey of fighting some zombies, they finally reached the hideout. Nell knocked on the wooden door, gave the secret code and showed her sign. They are allowed inside. The organization is grateful for her safe return, but before entering, they need to thoroughly examine her face according to their procedures. After confirming Nell's identity, a girl with long, silky hair hugged her. The woman seemed very worried about Nell's safety and was grateful for her safe return. Her name is Carlotta, and it seems she is a member of the organization closest to Nell. Nell then apologizes for not completing the task. Carlotta reassures her that everything is fine. After all, the mission she was assigned was impossible in the first place. All that mattered now was that Nell was safe. After a brief reunion, Carlotta finally realized Nell was stuttering. It seemed like Nell was really worried that Carlotta would find out that she had brought the enemy she planned to kill back to the church. With no other reason to think, Nell just said that Yuki was her servant and that they had met during the mission. She also confirmed that Yuki was quite talented, so she thought they might need his help. Yuki then introduces himself as an assistant, but it seems that Carlotta has some doubts about Yuki and is hesitant about whether the organization can truly trust him. It seems Yuki's strange mask is the cause of all these suspicions. Before Carlotta can dig further about Yuki, Nell immediately intervenes, assuring her that Yuki is not a bad person. So if Nell trusted him that much, Carlotta felt at ease. In any case, now they needed as many capable people as possible, so adding Yuki to the group couldn't hurt. Saying so, the three of them entered the house. It seems like the church has a way of checking whether someone is truly capable or not, just by looking at the initial security check. When Yuki walked through the door, he felt a strange tingling sensation. Since Yuki was able to get through the door, it meant he had no ill intentions towards the church, and this made Carlotta trust Yuki even more. She also says that Yuki doesn't need to worry about these elaborate security measures, as the church just doesn't want careless people entering their hideout. As she continued to examine Yuki's information, she discovered that he was a human and that his mask did not resemble a magical tool. Yuki proudly asserts that he is definitely human, since he only accompanied Nell to help her. Although Yuki seemed very calm on the outside, he was quite nervous on the inside. Luckily, he had acquired the skill of disguise. Nell, who was curious about how Yuki did it, asked him what he did. Yuki then replied that he simply changed his status so as not to attract suspicion. Saying that, Nell felt relieved when she heard all that. Yuki lowered her status by about 2 levels compared to Nell's, and only kept skills that didn't cause problems. However, Yuki didn't want to rely too much on this, as it would be obvious to the other party if their camouflage skills were at a higher level. Carlotta then led them to a secret door leading into an underground tunnel. Yuki appeared very excited about everything, but it could be clearly seen on Carlotta's face that this road was truly dangerous, and Yuki should be careful every step of the way. Meanwhile, Luffy, who is at home, seems to miss Yuki very much. However, no matter how far apart they were, her feelings remained unchanged. Back with Yuki and the others in the capital, Nell mustered up the courage to ask Carlotta about when the undead appeared in the capital. Carlotta said the first reported sighting was about 2 weeks ago before Nell and Yuki arrived. This coincided with the beginning of the princess's rebellion. After hearing this, it is now safe to think that they appeared because of the prince's orders. Looking at the way the soldiers acted against the undead, one could think so. On the other hand, Yuki ponders that although the prince can truly control the undead, that is not something that someone sitting in the highest position in a country would do. Yuki couldn't understand the prince's plan. Carlotta expressed disappointment that they were having difficulty handling the zombies due to their large numbers. Therefore, the church established an investigation team to search for the origin of the undead, but they have yet to find any clues. Knowing that Yuki has the ability to locate things from afar, Nell asks if he can help with the search, and it seems that Yuki is willing. He decided to try as soon as tomorrow came. Then, they reached the end of the tunnel, and Yuki was surprised to see a church with high ceilings and ornate decorations. Carlotta said that the church is always under surveillance, so they cannot do anything with the main building open to the public, especially since they are about to hold a strategy meeting. Carlotta invited Yuki and Nell to join everyone and briefly introduced them. As it turns out, Carlotta is an important character. She is the captain of the Knights of St. Faldiana and the commander of the campaign. Even Nell, with her high status, could not defeat Carlotta despite trying many times. She has many weapon-related skills at a very high level, and her dexterity is equally impressive like Nell. But as Luffy said, no one can win with just stats. An untrained person can be a genius, but they will always be oppressed by trained ordinary people. After the official strategy meeting began, the plan was for the remaining soldiers to infiltrate the royal castle, while the people there were distracted. Half of the soldiers in the city, along with the soldiers waiting outside, will attack the prince faction's headquarters. The primary goal is to rescue the king and princess, and if possible, capture the prince alive. This makes Yuki think that the king might be imprisoned in the dungeons under the castle, because if the prince wanted to threaten, then he could save the king himself. The attack will begin at midnight tomorrow when the church bells ring. Finally, the meeting ended. Carlotta decided to take Yuki and Nell to a pleasant place to rest. However, before they can leave the secret church, their group encounters a terrible zombie fight. When Carlotta asked his soldiers about the origin of the undead, no one in the group knew the answer. Yuki felt curious about how the undead found them. As it turns out, the sewer system connects to the secret hideout, but Nell has made sure that no one can easily get to where they are, as the sewer system is like an endless maze. Besides, the princess faction also used a magic circle to carry out their plan. So, when he couldn't find the source of the zombies, Yuki decided to help the group by using his navigation skills to find that source. However, Yuki always emphasizes that he may not be able to find it, as Carlotta may have doubts about his abilities. After a few minutes of locating, Yuki quickly found the source of the dark power. The air in that area was so heavy that even Carlotta could feel it. After finding the right spot, Carlotta uses her supernatural wood powers to break down the wall, revealing a sea of undead waiting to escape. Now it's only a matter of time before it's all destroyed. The number of zombies forces the group back, and the question is what they will do now. It seemed like the corpses floated down the stream and immediately turned into zombies. There was only one thing that could describe this situation, and that was that the princess faction was truly cruel. Nell started looking for the magic circle and quickly found it. As they got closer, it seemed like the princess side used the hexagonal magic circle. That means they have to remove at least 2 pegs because they need to destroy 2 triangles made up of 6 pegs. However, Nell begins to doubt her abilities when she questions whether they can really do this among the undead. Yuki, with confidence, volunteered that he would handle the zombies and leave the removal of the bolts to the others. Having said that, Yuki uses a water slide to destroy the entire zombie population. This makes Carlotta extremely surprised by Yuki's abilities. While Yuki fights off the zombies, the others rush in to take care of the posts. After a while, they defeated the entire zombie herd and finished removing all the necessary bolts. Yuki feels very impressed with the way Nell and Carlotta work together. However, it seems some zombies are still on the move. Turns out, those were corpses that had been undead for so long that they had turned into monsters. Now that the group has dealt with the cause of the undead problem in the capital, they can focus on their main mission, saving the king and princess. Nell thanks Yuki for what he did for them. Carlotta also apologizes that the group cannot express their gratitude properly right now, but at least they can give Yuki a good place to live. Meanwhile, on the other side of the capital, after the enemy received the signal that the magic circle had been broken, they thought that the corpse they had installed had completed its mission. Now just prepare for the final action. Back to Yuki and the others. When they go out into the world again, Yuki tries to tease some children, playing the devil. Actually, he is also a devil. When Yuki notices that people are hungry due to the lack of food supplies caused by the war, making it impossible for merchants to enter the capital, he decides to take control of things. After hunting some monster meat, Yuki also decided to make homemade seasoning, making the stew even more delicious. Everyone seemed a bit strange about the whole event, as it was the first time they had experienced such a festive event in their lives. Even the citizens wandering around the capital, who had smelled the aroma of Yuki's stew, decided to join the party. However, their happy moments are quickly interrupted when a group of soldiers from the castle stops the entire festival. They announced that there were reports of an edict stating that the food they were currently serving belonged to the country's management. The guards warned people that they would be labelled rebels if they did not obey orders. It seems like another problem, even more troubling than the undead horde, has appeared. The guards kept saying that Yuki and the others were eating lavishly, despite the fact that they were doing nothing while fighting for their country. They called them rebels who hid food from the country. Hearing the word rebellion from the guards' mouths made Carlotta angry. It seemed like the soldier had exaggerated his words. Before things got worse, Carlotta told the soldier that these were monsters she had hunted herself, so there shouldn't be any problem with what she did with them. However, it seems the government has thought of that. The soldier said that they were enforcing the food management decree that the capital had implemented, and that this was the duty of citizens to follow. Carlotta later asserted that she had never heard of a case of food collected by the military being distributed to civilians. However, it seemed that the guards had become complacent to the point of starting to talk about honor, which they claimed Carlotta and the others had no dignity in, and not listening to what the people were trying to say. The guards planned to collect all the remaining food, but Carlotta was not threatened by such people. She even told them that they let people eat their corpses. Carlotta believes that guards have more suitable jobs than being knights with bodies like theirs. Meanwhile, in the background, Yuki quietly listened to everyone. He couldn't believe that these guys were soldiers of the army. Why did Carlotta let them live, even though she could have defeated them? However, when Yuki tried to analyze the situation further, he was stunned to realize someone was watching them. It turned out that these people were actually deliberately provoking them by sending impolite soldiers to the church. They wanted the church to surrender first to declare defeat. While the argument heated up, a little girl accidentally bumped into one of the soldiers. Before he could draw his sword and hit the girl, Yuki immediately jumped in to help. While things were still tense, Yuki announced that he was going somewhere and would leave this place to them. When asked where he was going, Yuki said he was going to follow the person who was observing them, because if he reported the incident, it would be very bad. Looking at Yuki's courage, Carlotta cannot deny that he is very talented. Carlotta then reveals to Nell that she knew Yuki was lying when he said he was Nell's follower. This statement stunned Nell because she did not realize that Carlotta had realized it. Nell immediately affirms that Yuki is someone they can trust. Carlotta also believes that. She felt grateful that Nell had become a strong woman. This prompted Carlotta to start the war. Finally, they will begin the rescue mission at the castle. Meanwhile, back at home, it seems like the girls are having a good time trying together to help Luffy find a way to get closer to Yuki. First, Iduna tells her that she should show off her wings because that really makes Yuki excited. As odd as it sounded, they decided to ask She. She gives very broad and safe advice, which is to stay together and be happy, because Yuki looks happiest when they are together. However, this didn't help Luffy, so they turn to Layla. Layla gives the most effective and practical advice, which is that Luffy should frankly express his feelings. At first, Luffy seemed a bit hesitant, but when Layla explained that this might work, her expression suddenly changed positively. Additionally, Layla said that a little physical contact wouldn't be harmful, as it would help her attract Yuki. This way, she can use her charm to entice him. But can the Supreme Dragon endure Layla's training? It's only a matter of time before we know that. On the other hand, Carlotta was talking to the citizens. After a simple introduction of her identity, she told them about the chaos happening in the capital. The king is being held captive by rebels from the princess's side. That's why Carlotta emphasized that if the princess faction takes control of politics, the country's future will be extremely dark. And now, the church side will join the fight to return everything to its original position. Then, Carlotta asked all the people standing here who had the courage and determination to join the army. After what they witnessed, all the people without hesitation agreed to join the battle. Meanwhile, Yuki is still chasing the suspect. When arriving at the capital, Yuki noticed that the guys seemed to be heading towards the palace. Yuki even intends to let him escape and go alone to save the king first. There were many witnesses to the disturbance in the village just now, which is why Yuki believes that the church will not hesitate any longer. When he saw the suspect enter the castle door, Yuki quickly snuck in after him. Once inside, Yuki wondered which path would lead to the underground dungeon where the king was being held. At the same time, the church's forces successfully took control of the west gate. They also took over the barracks and captured many high-ranking soldiers. According to reports, the church army made it 7 parts of the way to the main gate, with only 5 dead and 6% wounded. At this rate, there will be no problem implementing the next plan. As expected, the church side initially encountered many difficulties because of the force difference compared to the prince's side, but thanks to the support of the people, the casualties were much lower. Now that the war is getting closer, they will let the wounded stay and heal because they still have a lot of work to do. Carlotta then asked his soldiers to report on the enemy's every move. She received news that there were a few magicians in the royal army. They seemed to be newcomers. The soldiers who were not warned about it stood still in fear when they saw the magician controlling the undead. This further confirms that the chaos in the capital is the prince's doing. Carlotta then realized that if they hadn't found and destroyed the magic circle last night, the casualties could have been very bad. That's why they owed the masked man, or rather Yuki, a favor. She then calls Nell to move to the next target. Nell immediately followed suit because they didn't have much time. On the other hand, Yuki is still having trouble finding her way around the castle. Even though he had a complete map of the palace, he couldn't find the entrance to the dungeon. If one does not know about the existence of a secret passage, it will not be recorded on the map. It seems there is a magic to stop intruders, and the magicians in the castle have taken that into account. This makes Yuki wonder if one of the soldiers he saw had anything to prove that they were residents here. When examining the man, he discovered a card called the Magic Authenticator. It states that the owner of this magical tool will not be affected by the magic that governs access to a particular location. While Yuki was conducting a search and rescue mission, a palace servant suddenly emerged from one of the rooms. When she was about to scream, Yuki immediately stopped her, telling her not to scream and assuring her that he would not harm her. He explained that he was just looking for the king and that the soldier lying on the ground was not dead. Hearing Yuki's true motive, the servant was surprised and gradually calmed down, nodding in agreement that she would not scream. After letting out a sigh, she asked if Yuki really intended to save the king and princess, and Yuki affirmed that he did. The servant appeared very worried about the royal family, even begging Yuki to save both royals. She then offered to lead him to the dungeon's entrance. She did exactly what she promised. Yuki then said that she should leave the palace immediately and take all her friends, because things were about to get chaotic. Sooner or later, this place will become a battlefield. Yuki then entered said entrance, and as he went down the stairs to the dungeon, he thought that the king was useless. But seeing the servant's reaction, it seemed like he had some charisma and kindness. However, if it was the princess's side, he would be killed immediately. This makes Yuki wonder if they kept the king alive to carry out a public execution, or just because he had some compassion. But now Yuki knew he wouldn't have the answers. When he finally reached the end of the tunnel, he was stunned to witness a gruesome scene. A grown man beating a poor girl before being able to land another punch on her. Yuki immediately stabbed the knife into the man's back, saying he made him feel creepy. This shows that the Demon King will do anything to protect people's smiles. Having said that, it seems like the princess endured all the punches and kicks for the sake of the kingdom. She wants to sacrifice and help her father in any way possible because she is the princess of the kingdom. That's why, even though it was painful, she told herself that everything would be okay, and she would be okay as long as she persevered. Even when they were in a lot of pain, she still said that as long as they think positively, help will come to them. The moment Yuki appeared, it seemed like the princess's pain immediately disappeared. Yuki then assured her that everything was fine and that she would recover quickly. Seeing that his daughter had been saved, the king immediately asked Yuki about his identity. Yuki, true to her nature, displayed her demon wings before the king. Seeing that Yuki was a demon, the king immediately worried for his daughter's safety and asked Yuki to release her immediately. Yuki replied that it was a harsh thing for the king to say, even though he had come here himself just to talk to him. Yuki says that the king is a useless person because he cannot properly educate his son, and he must forget about protecting his daughter. Yuki expressed his disappointment at being in trouble due to the king's foolish son meddling in his garden, which is the ghost forest. So Yuki also said that he would help the king, on the condition that they never touch his garden again. Hearing that, the king felt shocked and asked if Yuki was the demon king of the Phantom Forest. Yuki just silently confirmed. The king then agreed that he was indeed a foolish king, because he was just an old man who missed his son's change of heart, thinking it was just a simple mistake. The king then asked Yuki if he really thought he could do anything at this point. Yuki replies that if the king chooses to continue being a foolish king, the people who will pay the price will be the kingdom's citizens. No matter whose orders it is, Yuki will kill anyone who encroaches on her territory. Yuki also asked the king if there were still people who believed in him. He informed the king that even the church was working to save him. Even so, would he still want to stay in this cage, shivering alone? This made the king realize that as the prince's father, he had to accept responsibility for what the child had done. Yuki then breaks the cage so the king can pass through. He also said that the king should not change his mind in the future. Yuki emphasized that if he accidentally killed the king or the people around him, the person who would be saddest would be the princess. This made the king suspicious of Yuki, asking if he was threatening him that he would kill the princess if the king did not listen to him. However, it seemed Yuki didn't hear the king's question, and the king didn't say it again. In the end, the king just said thank you to Yuki for saving his daughter from the bad guys. When they returned to the palace grounds, Yuki was excited about the fight. He met a group of soldiers on patrol. However, the soldiers' actions made Yuki feel confused. Although no one was injured, the soldiers pretended to be blown away or injured just to retreat, making Yuki laugh. He thought that these soldiers were really cowards, and that even the princess was braver than them. However, there are also some soldiers who are truly fearless. As soon as they saw the king, they immediately rushed in his direction with a plan to recapture the king. Before they could do so, Yuki used her superhuman strength to knock the commanding soldier away. Now that the commander has been defeated, the remaining soldiers have no choice but to retreat. On the other hand, first of all, Yuki needs to know the prince's location. It seemed like there were fewer soldiers on the prince's side than he thought. Afterwards, one of the palace soldiers, claiming to be a prisoner of war, decided to serve Yuki. He said the prince could be in his office or in the throne room. While his soldiers all went to deal with the situation outside the palace, Yuki immediately thought it might be the church. Indeed, they accelerated the plan. The soldiers tell Yuki to let them handle the protection of the princess and any soldiers who may still be inside the castle. They will also escort the king to a safe place, so Yuki doesn't have to push himself too hard. If everything goes according to plan, help from the church will arrive soon. Yuki says that when the church arrives, the king and princess must immediately evacuate. The king, troubled with many thoughts, asked Yuki about his son. Yuki immediately replied that the prince would die by his own hand. The king nodded in agreement and only asked Yuki to take him away when the time came, promising not to hinder Yuki at all. Yuki let out a sigh. Meanwhile, Nell and Carlotta, along with the others, finally arrived. They were happy to see that the king was now safe, and having Yuki by their side surprised them. Yuki then asked the king not to reveal anything about him being a demon lord, as he had not revealed his true identity to the people of the church. Carlotta told the king that he should evacuate with his soldiers immediately. However, the king decided to entrust his daughter to Yuki because he really wanted to go with him. Carlotta tries to explain to the king that the situation has become worse, and the palace has now become a battlefield. If he gets caught up in this situation, the kingdom will lose its future. The king bowed his head and apologized for disturbing everyone, but he wanted to see everything for himself. Carlotta asked if there was any way for the king to change his mind, but it seemed like he wouldn't change his mind at all. Meanwhile, thanks to his skills, Yuki is able to detect an approaching danger. As skill level increases, danger detection areas and locations will also expand. When Yuki turned around, a man attacked him from behind. The man was quite surprised to see that Yuki was able to block his attack. Yuki then states that he has no interest in being stabbed from behind. The man replied that the reason he accepted this stupid quest was because he heard he could fight the church's strong female knight and hero, but it seemed he was lucky to be able to fight both of them in battle. Nell, who is always worried about Yuki, asks if he is okay. Yuki reassured her that he was fine and that she should take care of things on her side, quickly leaving the fight with this guy. He also asked Carlotta not to help in battle, as she would only hinder him. It seemed like a troublesome person had targeted him. Carlotta told the soldiers to take care of the princess and take her to safety. The others will go with her to capture the prince. The soldiers affirmed that they would protect the king with all their strength. After that, Carlotta left, leaving Yuki to face the enemy. Yuki asked this guy if it was okay to let the king leave like that. This guy replied that his mission was only to deal with strong opponents, and the strongest person from the church was Yuki. He feels happy and lucky to be able to fight someone as strong as Yuki, which makes Yuki feel uncomfortable and confused. Meanwhile, Nell can't help but worry about Yuki, because the person Yuki is facing is an adamantite-level adventurer. He was known as a war fanatic, to the point that no one could see the battlefield without him, even though, in terms of skills, he was definitely an orichalcum-level adventurer. With his terrible personality, the guild is having problems with him. Carlotta thinks that if they leave some soldiers behind, they will only hinder Yuki, so what they can do now is trust his skills. Back to Yuki and this guy, it seems like he is very surprised at Yuki's strength. Looking at his reaction is amazing. Yuki also checked this guy's stats and realized he was indeed a very strong person, with many unique skills and titles. Yuki couldn't deny that this maniac was truly strong. His stats are on par with Yuki, and his skill level is even higher. This makes Yuki think that he did not come to the palace to fight. He only hunted monsters to earn points, and wanted to soften Ria's fur instead of participating in a dangerous battle like this. This guy continued to attack Yuki from all directions, claiming that he was filled with passion, while Yuki appeared cold. Each punch made Yuki feel more pain. This guy continued to attack Yuki from all directions, claiming that he was filled with passion, while Yuki appeared cold. Each punch made Yuki feel more pain. This would be disadvantageous for Yuki, as he has much less experience and fighting skills. So, he decided to defeat this guy quickly, using what he was better at than him: magic. However, when Yuki tried to attack from all directions, this guy was so strong that he had the opportunity to stab Yuki in the arm. When the sword pierced Yuki's flesh, the look of surprise and pride on this guy's face was indescribable. However, he did not know that Yuki also had a plan. When he stabbed the sword into Yuki's arm, Yuki found an opening to attack again by stabbing a sword into his chest. He didn't realize it right away, but when the pain began to come along with the blood flowing out, this guy suddenly became weak and collapsed to the ground. Seeing the enemy finally defeated brings Yuki relief, because now he no longer has to worry about never returning home. Just thinking about Luffy makes Yuki feel happy and full of affection. In his mind, he thought that even though Luffy was about 1,000 years away from being able to challenge a demon lord, her effort was simply admirable. On the contrary, back at the demon lord's nest, the girls are looking for Luffy, who seems to have gone for a walk but hasn't returned yet. She was sitting at the edge of a cliff, feeling the wind on her skin, and almost lost in thought. They thought that maybe Luffy was having his own problems, but they believed that she would return when she was hungry. It seems that Luffy has felt lonely in Yuki's absence, which shows that a wavering heart will raise new questions. After an intense battle with the giant, Yuki feels lucky to have a high healing potion with him. Otherwise, things will get a lot worse. Not only his arm, but also some of his finger bones were broken. In addition to the healing potion, Yuki also thanks Layla for adjusting the Crimson Blaze, making its magic circuits work properly. When magical power is poured in, the blade will be covered in flames, burning the target it has hit. This flame can be adjusted according to the amount of magical power used. Seeing that he had finally defeated the strong man, Yuki felt very proud. Yuki recalls how he had just beaten the battle, with the stark difference between the race's average stats. But if you think carefully, Nell is only one level lower than him, but has the same stats. Yuki guessed that the growth of a hero was truly amazing. Now that the battle is over, Yuki decides to join the others. He quickly checked to see where everyone was, and after just a few seconds, he found them surrounding the prince. Carlotta told the prince that he was under suspicion of rebellion against the kingdom, so he was told to quietly follow the authorities. However, the prince did not seem to listen. He even ordered his subordinates to arrest Carlotta and the others, calling them rebels who had brought the kingdom into trouble. With those words, another battle began. During the fight, Nell noticed something was wrong. The prince's eyes looked strange and disturbing. However, Nell had no choice but to focus on the fight, so she shook her head to bring herself back to reality. In her mind, if they kept up this pace, it was only a matter of time before they won. Besides, Nell also thought of Yuki. Even though Yuki says he doesn't need help, she can't help but worry about him, especially since Yuki's enemy is an adamante. If the battle drags on, Yuki will be at a disadvantage. Therefore, Nell is now very determined to quickly handle this situation so she can help Yuki. Within seconds, Yuki appeared, attempting to slash one of the enemies. This surprised Nell a bit. Yuki then noticed the prince, as everyone turned their attention towards him. We can clearly see the prince's unusual eyes. Although Carlotta tries to tell everyone that, no matter what happens, they must protect the prince, one of the men stabs the prince with a sword. At that moment, Yuki finally realized that the prince had been dead for a long time. All this time, it seemed like the man in the cloak was the mastermind behind everything. However, before Yuki could catch him, the man escaped. When she didn't understand what was going on, Nell asked Yuki for confirmation. Yuki informs that the man in the cloak is probably the mastermind, and it seems that he is also the one controlling the prince's corpse. The prince's condition was disguised thanks to the ring he was wearing. When a person uses a false ring, it can show false information to those who want to check their status. When Yuki checked, he noticed magic circulating around the prince similar to that of the hooded man, so Yuki decided to fly up and chase him, leaving everything to Nell. He wanted her to attract everyone's attention for a moment. However, before he could finish his sentence, a magical portal opened, releasing a giant undead monster. At this point, the situation is getting worse. It was a giant corpse approaching. The question is, what will the group do now? Yuki felt quite surprised that his enemy had left him such a perfect obstacle. Yuki cannot leave the group behind when a giant monster is causing so much chaos. Therefore, instead of immediately going after the mastermind, Yuki decided to first fight the monster. He slashed one of its arms. Although the monster may move slowly because its body is so large, its punches are very fast. However, the situation is getting worse when Yuki realizes the monster has the ability to regenerate its wounds. This made Yuki feel both surprised and disgusted by the monster's recovery skills. Seeing Yuki in trouble, Nell jumps in to try to help him. She began chanting the undead spell, hoping it would be as effective as it had been against the other corpses. The soul has strayed from the laws of nature. Return to the world where you belong. However, the spell had no effect at all. Nell wondered what to do next. Yuki, with rational thinking, realized that the monster was still undead. He wondered if Nell could use stronger holy magic. Nell asserts that she can, but it takes time to cast the spell. While Nell concentrates on chanting the spell, Yuki gets ready to protect her. Yuki decided to fight the monster to turn its attention towards him. The others were also ready to help Yuki. Now, as everyone is trying their best to fight the monster, Nell focuses on her holy magic. However, despite their efforts, the monster's regeneration speed seemed to be even faster. Yuki isn't the type to just use meaningless combos, and even his Crimson Blaze doesn't work. There was nothing the soldiers could do to assist. When things were about to get worse, Nell finally completed her holy magic. She asked everyone to step back as she began chanting the spell, and when she released the magic, the monster was pushed far to the far end of the room. Nell looked as if she were firing a cannon. Carlotta cheered her on, but Nell's magic seemed to have no effect on the monster. When Yuki tried to slash it, it was easily thrown away. Yuki realized he might have been a bit lax, causing him to stagger in embarrassment. Nell was speechless at that scene. She apologized that her magic couldn't help much as the monsters continued to reproduce. However, Yuki thinks differently. If one looked closely, it seemed like Nell's holy magic had an impact on the monster because after receiving damage from her magic, its regeneration speed had clearly decreased. Yuki wonders if Nell can make one more attempt so they can win. Nell agreed, but she needed a little more time. Yuki immediately gave her a bottle of water that speeds up the production of holy magic, but before doing anything else, Yuki started a strategy meeting with everyone. His original plan was to wait for Nell to fire the holy magic, and once the magic had hit the monster, they would wait for the monster's regeneration rate to decrease to its maximum. Yuki will then slice it into pieces. Once it was cut into pieces, Carlotta ordered the soldiers to carry them further apart. This way, monsters won't be able to reproduce easily. Carlotta commented that listening to Yuki speak calmly seemed like a foolish strategy, but she thought there was no other way. Yuki reasoned that Since Castor was not present with them, he believed there would be a range limit to its regeneration ability. It is not always possible to regrow limbs when cut. Carlotta and Yuki began to carry out their proposed plan. Yuki also decides to take action on the soldiers themselves, who are so weak and scared that they don't dare raise their swords. He told them not to just stand there idly, otherwise they might go home and curl up in bed. Soldiers without the will to fight are just simple obstacles. While Yuki is talking to the soldiers, Carlotta informs him that the monster has reacted to Nell's spell. It seemed like it hated holy magic. The monster looked angry and frustrated as it rushed towards Nell, who was preparing holy magic. Yuki and Carlotta made sure it didn't come close to Nell at all. Seeing Carlotta fighting, the soldiers under her command also followed her into battle. Meanwhile, the knights in the palace did not want to let the holy knights take all the glory, so they decided to swallow their pride and stand up for the future of the country. As everyone tried to fight the monster, Nell finally finished chanting the holy magic and fired it at the monster. Yuki immediately slashed the monster vertically, causing it to split in two. However, Yuki was suddenly shocked when the monster grabbed him tightly. He was frightened for a moment, but then the monster finally released him. Although he was still shaking with fear, Yuki tries to act strong, cursing the monster and telling it not to think it can win in a battle of strength with Yuki. Carlotta asked Yuki if he needed help, because it looked like he was having trouble. Yuki quickly responded that he didn't need any help, so Carlotta could take care of the rest if possible. Yuki then pulled half of the monster's body as far away from the other half as possible. When he finally approached the exit, Yuki slashed it into pieces and threw it away. Nell asks what he will do if parts start regenerating in random places. Yuki replied that if it really had that much durability, he guessed he would have to give up. But it seems like everything will be fine. In the end, they won. While the demon lord was fighting hard, the people in the castle were happily eating. Soon the soldiers supporting the princess surrendered. The pro-princess group demands some mayors in rural areas, so it may take some time to restructure the capital's political situation. Most of the empty seats left by this incident are being filled by the church, and as for the king, he decided to regain his throne until the chaos in the country subsided. The king felt devastated when he learned that his son, dead, was controlled by a demon. He regretted the negative things he did to his son, not knowing that his son was being controlled. As for Yuki, he came here with the intention of killing the foolish prince to end the trouble, but instead he discovered that the person behind this incident was a demon. His true identity was still protected by his disguise, but if the prince trespassed into the ghost forest, it would be a big problem. Is the demon trying to use Luffy to destroy the country? While Yuki was wondering about everything, the princess he had saved from the dungeon greeted him with a bright smile. The princess asked Yuki to call her Errol. Together with their family, they expressed their gratitude to Yuki for helping them. Errol, who kept calling Yuki a hero, made Yuki feel guilty, so instead of lying to a child, Yuki told Errol that she was wrong from the beginning, because he was not a hero. To scare Errol, he shows off his devil wings and declares that he is a very bad devil. However, instead of being scared, Errol seemed extremely interested in Yuki's wonderful wings, just like how Luffy looked at them. Errol says that demons often kidnap princesses, and instead of running away, she even asks Yuki to kidnap her. Yuki felt shy and answered yes, if he felt like it. This makes the princess excited, declaring that she will wait for Yuki. The king then told his daughter to leave the room so he could speak privately with Yuki. As soon as Errol went out, Yuki reminded the king that he should teach his daughter carefully. The king apologizes, but he thinks that Errol trusts Yuki not to harm her. That proves that Errol is a really strong kid. The king again thanked Yuki for everything he had done. As a symbol of gratitude, the king asked Yuki if he wanted anything and tried his best to accommodate whatever was within his power. This surprised Yuki. Even though it might be a bit shy since I worked hard this time, I won't hold anything back. Yuki listed everything he wanted to the king. First, he asked for a written treaty confirming that the ghost forest was an inviolable area. Second, Yuki requested an identification card that could be used freely throughout the country. With this document, the king recognized that the ghost forest was the devil's territory and did not allow any acts of invasion. Thanks to that, Yuki can finally show Luffy and the others around. But before that happened, the king announced that he had also prepared a feast as a small gift. Although Yuki wanted to attend, he said he had left his companions outside the capital and was eager to return home. The king whispers that if Yuki is worried about his friends, the palace is always open to welcome them. With that, Yuki allowed Rhea to enter the palace as the king said. Looking at Rhea's majesty, the king felt shocked while Errol was extremely excited. The king said that if Yuki registered Rhea as his pet, he could take Rhea around the capital. The king also announced that he would only invite a limited number of people to the party, so that Yuki could enjoy it to her liking. When night fell, Nell, Carlotta and others also attended the party, and everyone was amazed by its beauty. Errol rushed over to Nell, trying to get her to her seat. While walking, Nell asked Yuki if he was sure it was okay to reveal his identity to Errol, who had almost revealed his secret to many people. Yuki reasoned that she was just a child, so no one would take her seriously if she told someone. When they arrived at the banquet table, Nell was surprised by the amount of food they had. This seemed to be the first time she had enjoyed such a lavish dinner. Errol, with pride, told everyone that this dish was prepared by their talented royal chef. The king once again thanked everyone for their hard work for this event, even though there may have been shortcomings. The king hopes everyone will enjoy the party and all will share in the joy. 2 hours later, it seemed like everyone was drunk. Nell almost tried to kiss Yuki while drunk, but luckily, Yuki avoided it. Even Errol seemed intoxicated, so before things got out of control, one of the palace servants picked her up, informing Yuki that he was taking her to a room. When Yuki turned his head, he saw that the king was also drunk. After all, the king had been through a lot, so Yuki guessed that he was just tired. As for Carlotta, she seems to be lusting after Rhea, Yuki's pet. In the end, Yuki decided to get Rhea and himself out of that crazy situation. The whole party was chaotic, but not in a bad way. Yuki couldn't deny that it was really fun. Whatever you say, it's time for Yuki to return home. No matter how fun the party is, nothing can compare to the feeling of coming home. Before leaving, Yuki gave Nell a gift, a dagger he crafted named Gekka. This is a dagger with a white blade that can create light to cut through the night, although its technical stats aren't really that good. Nell can keep it as a backup weapon, or use it for dismantling. Nell is delighted, and thanks Yuki for the gift, promising to take care of it and never forget it. After a long journey, Yuki finally arrived at his castle in the ghost forest. Bright smiles greeted him, and his eyes clearly showed his joy at returning. He told the girls that he had souvenirs for them, things he had bought from the market in the capital. Yuki thanks Layla and Laywin for the great work they did during his absence. Both were also happy to see him return safely. Yuki eagerly told the girls about all the experiences he had in the capital. Everyone was excitedly looking forward to what Yuki was about to say. However, only one girl seemed unhappy. Luffy stood silently in a corner. As Yuki approached, she suddenly stuttered and became flustered. Luffy said that she had felt lonely during Yuki's absence, surprising Yuki. He didn't expect to hear such words from Luffy's mouth. He asked her if she had eaten something bad. Yuki couldn't believe what she heard, so she kept asking Luffy random questions. However, Luffy decided to confess what he felt to Yuki. She explains that she realized she couldn't stand Yuki not being around. This shocked Yuki and didn't know what to say. Meanwhile, the girls were happy that Luffy had finally shown what she really felt. Luffy's statement confused Yuki, even though he felt it wasn't her style. He couldn't deny that Luffy looked cute, like a guinea pig. As Yuki remained still, Luffy noticed something strange when he smelled Yuki's scent. She said there was the scent of other girls next to him. Yuki tried to explain that he was just playing with a few kids, but it seemed like Luffy was jealous. Having said that, Luffy asked Yuki to go eat with her, and just like that, it seemed like they were back to normal. A few days later, Yuki noticed that Luffy had been acting strangely recently. She was always very close to Yuki, so he decided to ask Lune about it since he was pretty sure she knew something. A feeling of nervousness overwhelmed Lune's heart when Demon Lord Yuki approached and asked her if she knew why Luffy had been acting strangely lately. Lune's eyes began to water as she didn't know what to say to the Demon Lord. She tried to hide her fear with a bright smile, trying to assure Yuki that she didn't find anything strange with Luffy. However, Yuki doesn't think so. By now, Luffy usually spends most of the day sleeping, and when she wakes up, she only talks about food and games. She truly is the embodiment of innocence. But recently, Luffy has been acting like a puppy, always clinging to Yuki. There was no way Lune didn't know or realize that Luffy had been acting strangely recently. Lune could then only say that all she could comment on was that Luffy had been really cute lately, something Yuki couldn't deny either. However, before they got off topic, Yuki tried to ask Lune again. Lune asked why Yuki only asked him, and not Layla about this. Yuki reasons that he cannot resist Layla. Lune goes on to say that Yuki must treat her fairly and with respect, as well as Layla. However, Yuki immediately backtracked, arguing that a servant like Lyun couldn't command respect, especially since she didn't do any housework. Lyun replied that it was cruel of him to say that. However, Yuki knew that Lyun understood what he was doing, so he wasn't too concerned about hurting her feelings. Lyun reasoned that she was trying her best, so Yuki should treat her gently. But Yuki asked, "Isn't it normal for a demon lord to be oppressed?" He intentionally made it even more awkward for her by saying that without him, she wouldn't even have the chance to meet Ryu, which was also the main reason why she stayed. Now that he was cornered, Lyun had no choice but to tell Yuki what really happened to Luffy. She asks Yuki not to tell anyone that he heard this from her. Yuki didn't want to turn into ashes anytime soon, so he immediately agreed. Lyun then explained what really happened. She said that Luffy had been wondering about something during Yuki's absence. Hearing that, Yuki felt shocked because he never thought that Luffy, a powerful dragon, could be worried about something. Lyun explains that because Luffy has lived so long, she does not know how to maintain appropriate distance in relationships with others. That's why she's been feeling a bit nervous lately, because Luffy always acts passively and only receives attention from others. Now, she is in the process of testing how to communicate with people. Knowing this makes Yuki feel somewhat guilty. To make up for his actions, he invited Luffy out for a drink that night. Layla and Lyun were also chatting. Lyun whispered to Layla that she felt she did well that day. However, Layla seemed a bit hesitant to believe Lyun's words. Even so, Lyun was still happy because she helped Luffy communicate better with the person she always wanted. Actually, Luffy wasn't just thinking about how to communicate with others. She was wondering how to communicate with a specific person. Now that Yuki is finally getting closer to Luffy, things are likely to get better from here on out. Back to Luffy and Yuki, although dragons are known for liking alcohol, it seems Luffy is a girl who likes sweets. Therefore, she did not drink alcohol for a long time. When Yuki poured her a glass, she commented that the aroma of the wine was wonderful. Although alcohol may be easy to drink, Yuki still reminds Luffy to be careful when drinking, because she might get drunk. Luffy claims that she is the strongest dragon, so Yuki doesn't need to worry too much. She also shared that she did not expect Yuki to have a taste for alcohol. With that, Yuki will never succumb to an ultimate dragon who is blinded by his own power. The two had a drinking contest which ended with them downing the glass down to the last drop. It was obvious who won. Yuki had more stamina and drinking ability than Luffy, so Luffy ended up getting drunk. However, even though she had reached her climax, she still refused to give up, telling Yuki that all she needed was a little rest. While resting, Yuki opens up to Luffy about her sudden change in behavior. He tries to tell her that she doesn't need to change anything. She is perfect as before. Yuki even said that he loved Luffy's sense of humor. Even though she was sometimes stubborn and grumpy, she was still a great person that everyone wanted to be friends with. Luffy whispered that she wasn't unwilling to change. Actually, she felt comfortable being around Yuki. The intimate moments they shared made her feel warm and comfortable, which was exactly the feeling she had always wanted. Hearing that made Yuki feel confused. When Luffy realized what she had just said, she tried to hide her embarrassment by drinking another bottle of wine. And everyone knows what happened next. The two of them got drunk the next morning. Layla and Lyun were happy to see that Yuki and Luffy were becoming closer than ever, sleeping on the floor. When Lyun woke the two up, Yuki and Luffy couldn't say anything, just looked at their bodies so close to each other. Finally, they separated, both confused by what had just happened. After that tense moment, Yuki returned to work. He began to think about how strong even a human could be at a heroic level. If he encountered a demon or half-demon at that level, he would probably die next time. Therefore, Yuki was determined to improve his level at all costs. But first, he needed to fortify the dungeon. Yuki starts by adding some traps and mines. He also installed a system to gather all the monsters around in case of an intruder. He even added some poisonous plants. Additionally, since his dungeon lacked strong monsters, Yuki found time to add about 4 high-level boss monsters, completing his plan to upgrade the dungeon. Yuki realizes that adding a large turtle as a trap will only activate when there is an intruder. Now that the dungeon upgrades were complete, he and his pet continued hunting. During the hunt, Yuki had the opportunity to test the Zion Sword's magic, but the problem was that he did not encounter any enemies strong enough to test. Suddenly, a lion-like monster appeared named Manticore, a ferocious level 96 beast. Seeing the monster's level gap compared to him, Yuki felt worried. Meanwhile, in the capital, the king is having a meeting with one of his servants. It seemed they had finally finished analyzing the treasure left behind by the Demon Lord, and its creator was the Logard Empire. The history between humans and demons dates back a long time, and the Logard is one of the nations that has continuously fought demons. However, They could not deny the possibility that human and demon nations could work together in secret. Logard could be considered a rival nation to the Kingdom of Elysia, and the demons could view the nation of Elysia, which has long been at odds with them, as an obstacle. They would all benefit from Elysia Kingdom losing power. Therefore, the king will do everything to protect his citizens, even if he has to ask Yuki for help. Although he knew that Yuki, the demon lord, would not do so, he was certain that Yuki was willing to protect the princess. Ultimately, the king wants to keep Yuki as a good neighbor. Back in the haunted forest, Yuki is fighting the manticore with his sword. At the end of the battle, he couldn't help but be surprised by the sword's transformation. His sword can even communicate telepathically, making good use of the time. Yuki decided to make a handmade sheath for the sword, although Zion was a bit picky. In the end, the fiery sword chose the cute sheath. It is later revealed that when Zion received 2 senses, the first emotions that came to him were sadness and rage. Anger and sadness, fear and screams, in short, a vortex of negative emotions flooded its consciousness. It tells itself that the person holding the sword will scream in happiness, anger, sadness and fear, and thus, new sadness and rage are born again. Unless it gets caught up in that endless chain. While Yuki was checking her stats, a mysterious girl appeared. Is it Zion, your sword? Actually, it's a girl. And now that there are 3 girls staying at Yuki's castle, this is bound to get chaotic from here on out. He was still grateful that even though they were of different races, they got along so well. Luffy, who is always straightforward about his thoughts, asked Yuki where he kidnapped her from. Yuki quickly interrupted, saying that he did not kidnap anyone, because the girl was his Zion sword. Yuki then explains that he knows she is an intelligent weapon, but he has never heard anything like it before. However, the personification skill available in the DP shop may be one of the factors. However, it seems like Luffy doesn't believe any of his explanations. She still firmly believes that Yuki has a strange preference for little girls. To comfort Yuki, Layla and Lune even said that they didn't care, no matter how perverted Yuki was, but those words only made Yuki more nervous, seeing everyone laughing at him. Zion gave Yuki a hug and tried to cheer him up. Iduna then assures Zion that all of this is just normal and that she doesn't need to worry at all. Iduna also explained that this proves that they get along very well. Then the girls took Zion outside to enjoy the fresh air. When they finally made it outside, Iduna asked Zion about her favorite things. Zion paused for a moment, trying to think of an answer. Then Zion said she liked walking around. However, when she was asked what her other hobbies were, there seemed to be nothing left to say. As a result, Iduna told her that from today, they would find other hobbies that Zion would definitely like. After all, there are many things to do every day that will make life more interesting, and this will definitely make anyone eagerly wait for tomorrow to come. Hearing Iduna smile so brightly somehow made Zion rethink the way she viewed the world. Before, she always thought that the world was full of cruelty, an endless series of misfortunes, as if one were sinking deep into bottomless darkness. However, when she saw everyone around her happy and cheerful, she suddenly thought that maybe the world she thought was bad before wasn't so bad. Meanwhile, deep in a dark cave, a dragon named Guga entered. The larger dragon told him that this was not a place he could come to casually. Suddenly, Guga asked why the big dragon did nothing, even though it had the power to defeat the whole world. The big dragon smiled softly and said, "A boy like Guga who has never left the village dares to speak so loudly. Conquering the world is troublesome, and something I want to avoid as much as possible." Yuga became arrogant because the young people talked to him. Yuga immediately responded, saying, "It's sad that a dragon as big as you has become so docile." As a result, the Dragon King roared so loudly that it could soon shake the world above. Meanwhile, at Yuki's castle, the children are extremely excited to witness an interesting science experiment. Layla, who had never heard of the concept of science, asked Yuki about it. However, because Yuki did not have enough knowledge to explain in detail, he told everyone to observe and witness this mini-experiment for themselves. Yuki lit a candle and placed it in a jar. He then asked the children why the candle burned and what caused it. Iduna happily raised her hand, saying it was because of magic. Yuki had expected this answer, and he went on to ask Luffy if she could feel the fire consuming magical power. After examining it, Luffy concluded that it did not consume magic, which surprised the children, as they had always thought that everything was created by magic. To make things more interesting, Yuki placed the lid on the jar, and the flame immediately went out. This scene made everyone even more curious. Yuki explains that this is because there is oxygen in the air, which helps sustain the fire. When the lid is put on, the oxygen inside is depleted and the flame goes out. This proves that even though the world Yuki was reincarnated into has magic, that doesn't mean it lacks the basic elements of life. It's good to know that, although everything in this world has similarities to the world Yuki used to live in, it still has major differences that make it unique. Now, as everyone was amazed at the new knowledge they had just learned, they all started playing with the children, having a good time. They played until it was snack time. Time passed and the space became quiet. While Yuki relaxed reading a book, Luffy entered the room. What happened next was something Yuki never expected. Luffy walked in and immediately asked if he wanted to go on a date with her. This stunned Yuki, but he quickly replied yes. Luffy plans to go up the mountain, which makes Yuki excited because he thinks they will climb the mountain together. However, his interest quickly faded when Luffy said they would fly up there. The reason was that she wanted to check out a beehive on the mountain and eat honey from there. Although the sweets that Yuki makes are delicious, that honey is a formidable opponent for someone like Luffy. Yuki eventually realizes that Luffy doesn't really intend to go on a date with him. She just wanted a companion to go get honey. As a result, Yuki decided not to pursue the date, explaining that he didn't like honey, so there was no reason to go along. Luffy then grumbled, saying that she, his beloved mate, was craving honey. Wasn't it his duty to help her gently? However, it seems that our Demon King has gradually become cold. He thinks that his kindness is just a small thing compared to taking honey. Luffy immediately thought about making it up to Yuki. She offered to sleep with him that night if he agreed. But it seems like Yuki isn't interested at all, which makes Luffy confused and embarrassed. Finally, she said that even though he thought they could spend some alone time together, Yuki continued to claim that he did not want to sleep with Luffy, but just wanted to hug her. After that, the two flew to that sad mountain. That used to be Luffy's house, so Yuki looked around eagerly. When they landed, Yuki gasped because of the thin air in that area. As they looked around, Yuki became quite interested in the ruins left behind by Luffy's enemies. Luffy then allows him to use her scales, stating that they are stronger than divine steel and that her fangs are sharp enough to pierce it. Therefore, Yuki can use them at will. Besides, they cannot deny that the scenery on the top of the mountain is breathtakingly beautiful. The lake in the middle of the forest looked gorgeous. Just looking at it made Yuki confused as he realized he was admiring this scene with the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. Suddenly, a flock of bees began buzzing in the distance. When they find a suitable place to nest, they create a lake of honey next to it, and Luffy expects Yuki to get every drop of sweet nectar. She tells Yuki to kill all the bees while she harvests the honey. At that moment, Yuki slowly realized that the reason Luffy insisted on taking him along was to use him as bait, while she enjoyed harvesting honey. Yuki struggled with the countless bees that kept appearing, until Luffy finally harvested as much honey as she could. She turned to ask Yuki if he wanted her to help. Luffy then uses his ultimate move, Crazy Dragon God War, which is known to be the dragon's strongest trump card, as it creates a bee from magical power. In the end, Luffy destroyed the entire bee colony in the blink of an eye. However, the aftermath of the honey harvest left Luffy's body sore. As a result, Yuki had to massage her all night long until the next morning. The next day, Zion and the other children visited the castle. 3 guards guarding the castle lead Zion on a tour around the area. At lunchtime, Yuki called everyone together and was extremely happy to see Zion having a great time with everyone. It seemed like she was blending in very well with the girls, which made Yuki no longer worry too much about her. After that, he and Luffy decided to play some card games. While the two were engrossed in the game, Yuki discovered an intruder in the forest dungeon. Luffy immediately knew who it was, so she asked Yuki to stay and let her handle everything herself. However, Yuki affirms that she may need his help at any time. As a result, they both went out to face a new threat called Girodia. Immediately, Guga landed and said that he was relieved to have finally found Luffy, the one and only ultimate dragon. Guga, of the Black Dragon race, is now known as the Bandit and the King of Dragons. Guga couldn't believe his eyes when he saw Luffy imitating humans. Luffy then said that she was the one who should ask the question, why a brat like Guga became the Dragon King. Luffy asked what happened to Belm, as she did not think that the ancient dragons would easily bow to someone like Guga. With a confident voice, Guga proudly said that he killed all of them, including Belm and everyone in the dragon village. This is the only way for him to become the Dragon King. Now that he has achieved that, he plans to continue conquering the world because no one can stop him. That's why he came to see Luffy, hoping she would join his plan. According to Guga, if he and Luffy combine their powers, conquering the world will become easy. Although Guga's plan seems reasonable and quite attractive, the fact that he wants to make Luffy his wife is completely unacceptable. As soon as he heard the dragon's plan, Yuki immediately told Guga to shut up, because he was clearly a noisy and troublesome person. Yuki does not allow anyone to marry anyone, acting dramatic and noble. He declared that there was no way Luffy would do something as troublesome as conquering the world, as that would only reduce the time she had to rest. Since Yuki had already said everything Luffy was about to say to Guga, she simply told him to go back home and try seducing a girl of the same level as him. At that moment, noticing that Luffy seemed very close to Yuki, Guga concluded to himself that Luffy might be imitating humans just for Yuki, whom he called a bug. Luffy did not deny this. She calmly said that Yuki was indeed her partner. Even though Yuki may seem like a complete idiot, Luffy would rather deal with him than have to endure an idiot like Guga, who annoys her to no end. However, it seems that Guga does not easily accept defeat. Now, he is determined to fight Yuki at all costs, especially when he learns that Guga is not just an ordinary dragon. Luffy tries to jump in to help, but Yuki stops her, determined to solve everything herself. He wants to protect Luffy at all costs. Touched by Yuki's words, Luffy decided to entrust everything to him. Yuki is extremely confident that he will defeat Guga in the blink of an eye. However, when Yuki looked at Guga's raw stats and started comparing with himself, it became clear that Yuki's level was higher. However, Yuki begins to wonder if he has even a 1% chance of defeating the Dragon King. He could only dodge Guga's attacks because Guga looked down on him. In addition, the effect of Yuki's title is also a big factor that helps him survive in this battle. Yuki knows that if he is negligent for even a moment, Guga will definitely turn him into minced meat. The skill from Yuki's Judger title, activated when facing someone whose title is related to crime, allows him to increase his power 15-fold. However, it seemed that Yuki's initial confidence had gradually decreased. He is having difficulty confronting the Dragon King. Despite Yuki's best efforts, Guga was still strong enough to cut his arm several times. But Yuki did not allow Guga to have the last laugh, constantly trying to counterattack each time he was attacked. Guga hits Yuki, and always brags about it to Luffy, saying that he is the only one worthy of Luffy. If this battle continues any longer, Yuki may lose. When Guga threw a piece of metal at Yuki, he tried to dodge it as best he could. The fact that Yuki is not dead shows that he is a rather persistent opponent, but his situation is still very dangerous. So is there any chance for Yuki to turn the situation around? While being pressured by a strong opponent like Guga, it seems Yuki needs to do his best to win. However, while being beaten up by Guga, Yuki was also secretly using all his strength to set up a series of booby traps while he could. He knew that the only way to make up for the difference in strength between the two was to take advantage of the dungeon. Yuki's plan begins to work, but Guga also realizes what is happening and tries to anticipate Yuki's attacks. However, in the end, he fell into Yuki's magical seduction trap. Although Guga's attacks are powerful and fast, his movements are simple and brutal. Compared to Luffy, Guga probably has very little fighting experience than her. As for Luffy, she tried her best to stay calm and not worry too much about Yuki. Even so, she still hoped that Yuki wouldn't let her guard down even for a moment. Now Yuki finally found an opening to counterattack. Yuki tried to take advantage of every opportunity, attacking Guga from all directions. However, Guga tried to counterattack. He began to emit intense flames, and if Yuki wasn't careful, he could turn into ashes at any moment. Guga knew that he couldn't win based on speed alone, so he tried to maximize his firepower. It seems this tactic is working, as Yuki is currently in the worst shape. Meanwhile, at Yuki's castle, everyone is worried about his safety. Before the battle began, Yuki asked everyone not to go out until he and Luffy returned. Now, the girls can feel the ground shaking strongly for a long time, which makes them extremely worried and uneasy. To reassure each other, they tried to appear optimistic, saying that Yuki was definitely the strongest man. But few people know that Yuki is really struggling, injured and in pain after his unexpected defeat. However, it seems that Yuki possesses an extremely strong will. Even though he lost an arm, he still tried to fight again. Yuki tells himself that having to endure this pain to protect the girls, he cannot stop while the dragon is still alive and breathing. Meanwhile, Guga, thinking he has killed Yuki, is bragging to Luffy about his strength. However, his arrogance was quickly extinguished when he saw Yuki still walking forward, despite bleeding profusely. Guga was extremely surprised to see that Yuki, despite being seriously injured, was still breathing and walking. This made him extremely angry at Yuki's persistence. Never in his life has Guga felt so angry. With seething anger, Guga determined to turn Yuki into ash with his dragon breath. As he took aim, Yuki prepared another plan. As it turned out, Yuki's previous attack was not in vain. Everything in the dungeon belongs to the owner, which means it's all owned by Yuki. He was silently preparing a counterattack when carbon monoxide was released into the air. This is a colorless and odorless substance, and although it exists in the air, if the density exceeds 0.15%, it will cause dizziness and nausea within minutes. If the density exceeds 1%, it will cause people to lose consciousness and lead to death. Yuki uses wind magic to create a barrier around himself, helping him avoid being affected by toxic gas. However, this also means that Yuki cannot use any other magic at this time. Luffy seemed to have realized something and defended himself. Yuki was really happy when Guga only used his muscles instead of his brain. Now Guga is completely paralyzed, allowing Yuki to perform any attack on him. Finally, it was all over. Yuki was exhausted after winning that terrible battle and gradually fell asleep. When he woke up, Luffy was very happy that Yuki had survived the intense battle. Yuki realized he had fainted and slowly opened his eyes. Luffy said that he was absolutely right. She joked that she was a merciful woman and that she gave Yuki the best pillow, which was nothing but her thighs. Yuki couldn't agree more, looking very happy. Yuki seemed more energetic than Luffy expected. As he thought about it, Yuki realized his wound had disappeared. It turns out, Luffy used his magical power to heal all of his wounds. Yuki then asked her about the amount of carbon monoxide he had collected. Luffy announced that it had been dispersed to the point where it was no longer harmful. Even though Luffy restored Yuki's strength, she still advised him to rest for a while to fully regain his strength. Luffy then told Yuki that he did a good job protecting her. However, Yuki didn't seem to think so. Luffy then reassured him that he protected her and defeated her enemies the best way anyone could, and that's why he should be proud of himself. Yuki gradually understands that doing your best in times of need is completely worth it. Although Luffy was worried about Yuki, she was grateful that everything was over now. With the cool breeze brushing against her skin and the bright sunlight in the sky, Yuki finally revealed her true feelings to Luffy as he was caught up in the moment. Unexpectedly, he confessed to Luffy that he really liked her a lot. This made Luffy tremble a bit. Her face turned red with confusion and surprise at Yuki's sudden confession. However, instead of stopping, Yuki continued to express her feelings. He said that, although he may not be as good as her, he will try his best to become a man who can walk beside her. All he wanted was for Luffy to be by his side from now on. Luffy, who also had feelings for Yuki, without hesitation agreed to his wishes. For the first time, the two finally shared a kiss. At this moment, Luffy decided that she would accompany Yuki from now on. While they were embracing each other warmly, a vow was made after that unexpected kiss. Luffy tried to explain that the kiss was just proof of the Dragon Clan's oath, so Yuki shouldn't misunderstand. However, Yuki was fully aware that it wasn't that simple. Luffy tries to explain that the kiss means that from now on, Yuki will become her other half. Yuki then teases her, saying that from today, she will be his wife, which Yuki is very excited to hear. Luffy warns that if Yuki intends to add another female companion, she will be very angry. With that warning, they made a vow to each other, a vow that would last forever. After the intense battle, everything gradually returned to normal. Zion appeared extremely angry because Yuki did not inform her about participating in the match. Yuki tried to comfort and apologize, but Zion couldn't contain her emotions. She was worried about Yuki so much. Additionally, when she remembered the moment she saw Yuki and Luffy being intimate in front of her, Zion felt even angrier. To calm Zion down, Yuki offers to stay with her all day and do whatever she wants. He hoped this would make her stop being angry. Seeing Yuki try so hard, Zion became happy. She says she wants Yuki to stay with her like this forever. However, the other girls now feel jealous because Yuki doesn't treat them the same way he treats Zion. Iduna spoke up, saying that she was also very worried about Yuki, so he had to hug her too. In the end, Yuki had to hug a group of children in the corner of the room, making everyone laugh. Luffy didn't look too happy to see his husband surrounded by children during family time. After spending time with everyone, Yuki checks his stats and realizes that he has become extremely strong. He has 2 new skills, Indomitable and Royal Menace. The skill Indomitable greatly reduces damage from enemies and increases all stats by 1.5 times when HP drops below 20%. Meanwhile, Royal Menace is a skill that emits a threat to all enemies within a certain range, slowing their movements, and the effectiveness depends on the difference in stats. Between user and enemy, Yuki also receives the new title, Dragon Demon King, a title given to the Demon King who defeated the Dragon King. This made Yuki the king of the Dragon Clan, and is now revered by the Dragon Clan members. Yuki has no plans to rule over them though. Yuki's dungeon also leveled up, and the DP he used to create traps also increased significantly after transforming Guga's corpse. Even though Yuki's analytical skills were maxed out, he still couldn't see Luffy's stats. This led him to conclude that his wife might be so powerful that no number could describe it. Although he felt a bit regretful about losing the TP he received from Luffy because she was considered a family member by the dungeon system, Yuki felt happy about it. Another peaceful and happy day comes to Yuki's house. Lyun mocked Yuki, making him feel very uncomfortable. Seeing Yuki moving too much, Luffy reminded him not to push himself too hard, because he still hadn't fully recovered. Yuki then jumped on the bed, hugged her and rested. After resting enough, Yuki continued training with Zion. He merged Luffy's fang with the sword Zion and added some magic to it. Now he just needed to integrate new magic circuits into the sword. Zion has also received the title Dragon Slayer, meaning she is now a weapon that can cut through the flesh and blood of Dragon Clan members and take their lives. No one can stop this blade. All of Zion's stats increase by 1.5 times when facing dragons. Additionally, Zion has reached legendary level, with attack power over 900, stamina over 11, and magical abilities dependent on the sword. Yuki is also planning to add self-healing abilities and magical effects to the ring that Luffy gave him, to strengthen the scientific magic circuit. As he continued his training, Demon King Yuki became more and more powerful, from crushing the Manta army, hunting with Rear, to creating jet propulsion with Zion's wind magic. This shows that Yuki has tried many things over the years. Luffy realized that if she hadn't met Yuki, she probably wouldn't have known that the world was so big and interesting. If he didn't know how Yuki lived freely, Luffy thought maybe she would still live alone on that mountaintop. Therefore, she is very grateful to Yuki for showing her how beautiful the world really is. Meanwhile, another day passes. Yuki has another hunting session with Rear, but this time he looks full of energy. The question is, what is Yuki trying to do? Yuki is seen summoning her pets for Divas. First is Orochi, a giant snake with the skill Poison Fang. Next is Yata, of the Black Crow breed, with the skill Prophecy. Then Byaku, a monster cat with the skill Genjutsu. Finally, there is Sami, a water fairy, with the special skill Water Control. All of them were summoned. Yuki introduces himself to all of his pets and says that he wants all four to hunt down every monster and intruder in the dungeon. However, the monsters in this area are quite strong, and there are traps, so they need to follow Rear's instructions to know how to proceed. Yuki entrusted everything to Rear to manage. Luffy and Iduna then entered, seemingly coming to see Yuki's new pets. Luffy said that she only came because she was worried that Yuki might create a new girl in the dungeon. Yuki hastily reassured her that the girls in prison were not chosen by him. While they continued to spar, Iduna looked extremely happy and excited to meet each of Yuki's cute pets. She hugged each animal with so much love, quickly getting along with them all. Perhaps because of her friendly nature, Iduna easily integrates with people. Luffy, intending to anger Yuki, said that Iduna must have inherited his courage. She also teased that she hoped Iduna would not inherit Yuki's bad habits. While the two continue to argue, Luffy tries to lecture Yuki that he needs to learn from her and should act more calmly. Yuki immediately responded that he didn't want to lie around sleeping all day and doing nothing, like Luffy. The argument continued. They were so engrossed in conversation that they didn't notice that Iduna was flying with Yuki's crow 100 feet in the air. Both Yuki and Luffy were surprised when they saw that scene. Luffy immediately asked Yuki to quickly catch up with Iduna, while she watched from below to ensure that if Iduna fell, she would cook the crow immediately. Luckily, Yuki promptly saved Iduna from her fatal fall. A few days later, Yuki and Rear are seen playing outside again, but this time, everyone participates. Luffy and Lyun were very excited and appeared extremely competitive. This is probably the first time Luffy voluntarily participates in the game. However, Luffy complained that the lineup was unfair, as she and Lyun only had 2 people, while Yuki had 5 pets. With a clear advantage, Yuki teased Luffy, asking where her confidence had gone, reiterating that someone as proud as her certainly could not be defeated by someone as ordinary as Yuki. As a result, Luffy became extremely excited and determined to compete with Yuki to the end, despite the difference in numbers. Luffy kicked the ball so hard that he almost injured Yuki's pet snake. While they were happily playing, a dark shadow appeared in the forest, secretly observing them from afar. However, Yuki soon discovered the intruder. He quickly drew his sword and was ready to fight immediately. Usually, most intruders are dealt with by monsters in the dungeon, but sometimes there are those who can easily bypass traps, like this one. This time the intruder is Haloria Layla, a demon guardian and secret royal soldier, but the question is, why is she here? When Yuki and Haloria meet, Haloria reveals that she wants to ask Yuki if he is willing to cooperate with the royal family and form a beneficial alliance to fight their common enemy. Now, it's only a matter of time before we know Yuki's answer. While Yuki and Haloria were talking, Layla walked in with a drink to quench her thirst. Haloria learns that she is someone called a Kinjin, one who craves knowledge, and that she belongs to the Horned Sheep clan. Hearing this made Yuki curious. Haloria later explained that it was her nickname as a child. As Yuki thought about this, he suddenly remembered that Haloria had actually gone missing after she tried to search for ingredients that only existed in the human world. Haloria, who was very interested in Layla's story, finally stopped asking further questions when she saw that Layla seemed uncomfortable. After that, Haloria got straight to the point of why she came to the forest. She explains that the area ruled by demons has been divided into two factions. On one side were the demons involved in the recent disturbances in the royal capital. On the other hand, there is a force trying to recruit Yuki. This means that the two factions of the demon world are about to go to war. Yuki immediately declared that he did not want to get involved with any side. Haloria continues to explain that the opposing faction already knows about the dungeon and Yuki's existence. She mentions the event that happened with Alicia and thinks that it would be better if Yuki cooperated with the kingdom since they have the same enemy. Yuki then asks Layla for her opinion, and Layla recalls that when she was in the demon world, the situation was as tense as it is now. The conflict between the two factions seems to be increasingly fierce. The demon tribe are extremists, and their forces can pose a threat to the forest. It would obviously be troublesome if they went to the dungeon to take revenge. Most worrying is that they used Luffy as a killing machine. This makes Yuki change her mind. As for the kingdom, they just want to build a good relationship with Yuki because they share a common enemy. And if possible, Haloria wants Yuki to be able to assist them in an emergency. Knowing full well Yuki wouldn't do anything for free, he asked what benefit he would receive. Haloria explains that they are closely monitoring the opposition's movements, so they can provide information to Yuki. However, other than that, they don't have anything else to offer. This is why Haloria came to Yuki to ask him to meet their lord directly to negotiate. This left Yuki extremely confused, because instead of their lord coming to him to ask for help, he himself had to come to them to ask for help. Haloria went on to explain that they couldn't let the lord leave the country right now, so Yuki's visit was necessary. Even though this means another trip with the girls, Yuki is quite excited because he can go sightseeing as the Demon King while enjoying a sweet honeymoon. However, Yuki knew that he needed to discuss this with Luffy first, so he let Haloria stay for a day to wait for an answer. Afterwards, Yuki asked Luffy for advice, but it seemed like Luffy had no intention of going along. Although this may surprise Yuki, Luffy decides to stay behind instead of going on an exciting trip with Yuki. Yuki tries to persuade Luffy to come with her, but it seems she has decided to stay. As a result, Yuki had to go to Demon World on his own without Luffy, staying there for about 3 weeks or longer, depending on the situation. Although he didn't worry too much about the dungeon since Luffy was still staying, he was still a little worried that something bad might happen while he was gone. Instead of letting herself be immersed in negative thoughts, Yuki tries to stay optimistic. The next day, Yuki prepares to leave for the Demon World, and it seems that Layla will be accompanying him. Luffy decides to let Layla follow Yuki as a guard. Although Luffy is not too concerned about Yuki's strength, she is only worried that he can be easily swayed by the girls of Demon World. Before letting these thoughts haunt him all day, Luffy tasks Lune and the others with helping her take care of her daily chores. So Yuki is on her way to fight, while Luffy stays at home, taking care of everything like a housewife. Yuki and Layla ride on rear to the Demon City, while Haloria rides on Roche, the giant snake, and she clearly isn't amused at all. When they finally arrived at the city, Yuki was amazed at its vastness. However, he couldn't stop looking at girls of different races. Not because he had any intention of flirting with them, but just because he was surprised by the variety. Layla and Zion warned him not to make a mistake, as they would definitely report everything to Luffy. Having arrived at the city quite late, Haloria announced that they would go to the next city by carriage after resting for a night at the inn. Therefore, everyone should rest well because there is still a long journey ahead. The next morning, Yuki and the others were surprised when the horse carriage they thought turned out to be an elephant carriage. Layla explains that it used to be horse-drawn carriages, but after a few races with elephants, people switched to using them. Hearing this fascinated Zion, she enjoyed the story. Layla always tells fascinating stories, and that's why Zion is looking forward to the next stories. When Haloria finally arrived at the meeting point, the group entered the elephant carriage one by one. They were surprised, but especially Yuki, to see the Catwoman they met yesterday. Her name is Naya, an axe-wielding warrior. There is also Mia, a witch with extensive knowledge of magic. And finally, Gruinu, a techno-demon with sword-dancing skills, along with her giant watermelons. Yuki tries his best not to make any mistakes, as he is watched every second by two girls. While they talked, Yuki announced that a group of robbers was coming towards them. Since their mission was to protect the elephant cart, the girls immediately took a fighting position. However, Yuki is extremely calm about this situation, which makes the girls a bit confused. Yuki tells the girls to calm down, because he has everything under control. Using the Earth Dragon magic, he defeated an entire group of bandits in a single blow. Yuki appears very proud of his new magic, and Layla praises him for it. Meanwhile, the other girls are surprised by Yuki's ability to use magic without chanting. Furthermore, these spells are extremely powerful, making everything even more unbelievable. Yuki then asks the girls if robbers appear often. Layla explained that this was a recent problem. As Yuki thought, taking Iduna and the others to the Demon City for a vacation at this time would not be safe at all. So to do that, you have to make sure that the whole land becomes safer for everyone. Finally, they arrived at the Demon World's capital, Ragheg. The girls say goodbye, as they will now go their separate ways. Yuki couldn't deny that this trip wasn't boring at all, thanks to the girls. Zion also found this trip interesting. While walking around the capital, Yuki asked Layla if she had ever been here. Layla replied that she only came a few times for research purposes. This makes Yuki curious about the field that Layla pursues. As a lover of knowledge, Haloria explains that there are quite a few fields that Layla is interested in. Layla even wrote many impressive theses in many different fields, and most people knew about this, much to Yuki's surprise. Layla humbly said that she only researched based on her curiosity. This makes Yuki wonder if one day, if he's no longer interesting, Layla will leave him. This question makes Layla smile, as she assures Yuki that her interest in the Demon King will never fade. Hearing that, Yuki breathed a sigh of relief because they had built a stronger bond than ever. When they arrived at the Demon King's castle, the only word to describe the place was huge. Haloria led them through many hallways, and when they finally arrived at the Demon King's chamber, a man praised Haloria for successfully completing her mission. It turns out this man is the Demon King, named Final. Finally, the Demon King was extremely happy to meet Yuki in person. Since Yuki had heard most of the situation from Haloria, the Demon King didn't need to explain in detail anymore. Knowing that Yuki was tired, he got straight to the point. The Demon King admits that he is quite good at planning and taking secret actions, but in terms of fighting ability, he is weaker and far behind Yuki. That's why he wanted Yuki to become a symbol of strength for them. This sounds appealing to Yuki, however. The plan ends up being more extreme than he thought. The Demon King is willing to turn himself into bait, causing enemies to focus on him. Hearing that, Yuki felt so stressed that she wanted to go home. However, since he was here, Yuki decided to ask a few more questions. Yuki asks why the Demon King is so sure about his strength, and if he is really as strong as he says, what will the Demon King gain if Yuki participates? To answer the first question, the Demon King revealed that his subordinates used the analysis guild on Yuki, but were unable to see his stats. This led him to conclude that there was a significant level difference. Additionally, the demons who tried to convince the new Dragon King to join them said that the Dragon King had disappeared while near Yuki's dungeon area, leading the Demon King to believe that Yuki had defeated him. After all, if Yuki didn't defeat the Dragon King, then someone who lived with the Dragon King wasn't weak. Regarding Yuki's second question, the Demon King explains that his information and network will be useful to Yuki. He knew that it had not been long since Yuki had become the Demon King, so these relationships and information would be essential. In addition, the Demon King also promised to provide resources for Yuki's dungeon, as long as it was within his ability. The Demon King is ready to give Yuki what he needs. Yuki immediately asked if he could get money, treasure, and the like. The Demon King immediately answered yes, even adding that if Yuki was in the demon world, whether an autonomous region or a sanctuary, he would arrange for Yuki to be able to vacation wherever he wanted. He even provided a tour guide for Yuki so he could fully enjoy the experience. In addition, Yuki can also bring everyone home safely. This makes Yuki very excited, and it seems that he is actually leaning towards accepting the deal. However, upon further thought, Yuki realized that no matter what, he was still considered an enemy by the other demons. This made him wonder if there was any real benefit to being independent in this situation. Although the reward seems very attractive, Yuki still considers whether this is the right decision. Finally, Yuki decides to ask one last question. Are the secret demonic forces in the capital Al-Shil under the command of the Demon King? With a somewhat gloomy tone, the Demon King replied that no, he did not control them. If it were him, things would definitely be different. Yuki didn't understand the situation very well, but he told himself that if the Demon King Final did anything suspicious, he would deal with him immediately. With that decision, Yuki agreed to cooperate with the Demon King and asked him to provide the details of the plan to Layla so they could begin immediately. The Demon King then invites Yuki to follow him. Meanwhile, a man and a woman are waiting for someone. The man looked impatient, asking how much longer Demon King Final would make them wait. But it seemed there was nothing else they could do, because there weren't many people, even in the demon world, capable of joining the alliance. They wondered who would show up. When Yuki and Demon Lord Final finally arrived at the giant conference room, Demon Lord Final decided to settle down and greet everyone. Once everyone was in place, the Demon King began introducing Yuki to the members of their alliance. First, he introduces the Mountain Dwarf King, Doda, who looks like a Viking warrior. Next is the Forest Fairy Queen, Noflas Filet, with her angelic beauty and grace. Finally, the leader of the bee tribe, Valdroy Glord, looks very scary at first sight. The Demon King introduces Yuki to them, declaring that he is the Demon King of the dungeon, Yuki. The Demon King hopes that everyone will get along as they will become allies. However, it seems things did not go so smoothly. After hearing that Yuki was a dungeon demon king, Valdroy immediately reacted, deeming it unacceptable to bring a demon king filled with greed and arrogance into their ranks. Even Doda agreed with Valdroy. The Demon King tries to reassure them, asserting that Yuki is trustworthy and that in every situation there are always exceptions. However, it seems they don't trust the Demon King's assessment, thinking that he really doesn't fully understand Yuki, especially since they can't see Yuki's stats because they don't have analytical skills. On the contrary, Noflas speaks up and says that if the Demon King trusts Yuki, she will trust him too. It seemed that Noflas possessed Yuki's analytical skills, and she could see that he was truly trustworthy. With level 9 analysis skill, Noflas can see a lot of information about Yuki, which surprises Yuki. Noflas then asked if it was unusual for a demon king to leave the dungeon and go to the demon world. Yuki replied that he really had no other choice, since he was almost forced to come here. Yuki reassures everyone that his dungeon is being safely guarded by Luffy, his wife, who is still at home. He is confident that it is the safest place in the world and there is nothing to worry about. When Noflas heard the word wife, she appeared surprised and at the same time shocked to realize that Yuki was the person everyone was rumored to be. As it turns out, he is widely known as the mate of the legendary dragon Luffy. Even though Luffy did not accompany Yuki on this trip, her name still had a strong influence, helping Yuki gain trust from everyone in Demon City. Just hearing that he was the legendary dragon's partner, Yuki immediately gained everyone's trust. This shows the love and influence he has everywhere. Once everyone was at peace, the Demon King decided to start the meeting. After the meeting ended, Yuki informed Layla about all that was discussed. Layla announced that according to what had been discussed, they would enter into a military alliance with the Demon King, Spras, and forge a friendship with the Demon King, including supporting each other as allies in times of need. Set. This alliance will be announced at the Four Species Conference. During the future alliance meeting, Layla worries that a military alliance is a symbol of power and that it is too risky. Yuki explains that no matter which path they choose, they will eventually have to confront the demons. In that situation, it's better to have allies. However, Yuki is more worried about the possibility of something bad happening to the girls and others, so he plans to be more careful this time. Yuki then gives Layla an item that looks like jewelry. Layla is a bit confused at first, so Yuki explains that it's a teleportation device she can use to get back to the dungeon. This is essentially a teleportation magic tool that can only be used once when activated by the user's magic. Yuki then asked Zion to wear it, and if she needed to use it, she simply poured the raw power from her katana form into the magical tool to return. Even though Zion wants to stay with Yuki, she still has to accept this plan. Yuki is trying to plan ahead in case things get worse. The next day, the contract with the Demon King was officially signed. The contract states that the King of Demon World will support and patronize Demon King Yuki as much as possible. Additionally, the King of Demon World will use Yuki as a mercenary and must pay him appropriate compensation for his services, regardless of whether the current situation is resolved or not. Afterwards, Layla negotiated many rewards, which Yuki called a war of words and smiles. On another busy but wonderful day in the Demon World capital, Yuki decides to treat the girls to a delicious meal. While everyone was eating quietly in a bustling place, Layla opened up a conversation, saying that Yuki should rely on the people around him more because he always maintains a reserved personality and tries to do everything slowly, independently. Yuki expressed that he should have let Layla negotiate from the beginning, and he decided to give her the job next time. Layla, full of excitement, looks forward to the next time. However, Yuki only said that to avoid arguing with Layla because he couldn't bear it right now. As he took a sip of his drink, Yuki glanced to the side and saw two women in cloaks passing by. One of them looked very familiar, making Yuki unable to take his eyes off it. When the girl approached their table, Yuki couldn't help but ask if she was who he thought she was. When Nell's name was called, the girl stopped for a moment and turned around. At that moment, Yuki confirmed that it was Nell. Meeting each other again by chance in a strange city shocked them both, especially Nell, who didn't believe she could see her Nissan again.